in this Indaba, Dr. Mike Brownnutt came in and we had a long discussion about the intersection between religion and science. Mike's background is in physics, fundamental or basic physics, where he's got a bit of a history building ion traps with one of the foremost leaders in the field of ion traps, namely Rainer Blatt. He was Rainer Blatt's PhD student, or postdoc student, or postdoc. And he was out in Austria for a number of years, and they came over to Hong Kong to set up his own department, where he looks at the intersection. Oh, shut up! Where he looks at the intersection between religion and science, and we go into questions like the difference between is and ought. In other words, should science prescribe? Should science be asking ought to questions, whereas science is actually typically good at is questions, and indeed religions are more into ought to questions versus is questions, and how we sort of like arrive at a sort of middle point, I could say. We also look at areas on the internet of how technology is taking over life, and how to sort of like retain the humanity, our humanity, being lost to what Mike refers to as machine influenced or machine influenced traits like efficiency and standardization, etc., etc. It was good having Mike in. That cup of tea, that Earl Grey cup of tea, was quite good. And anyway, before I start blabbing, I should probably let on. And 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Mike, thanks so much for coming in. This is our it's one I met you about, what was it about? I think it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Something like that.
Yeah, and we had, after a particular lecture, I recall us going to some pub, the three of us, Sebastian's here too, and we had one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a long time. And I thought, now that I've sort of set up this platform, I'd love to sort of reproduce that. I think it'd be great to sort of document that.
I make no guarantees for reproduction, but we can try and have a new one.
I think we had a couple beers at that point, so a reproduction would be like...
We have tea.
Yes, Earl Grey tea. Cheers. A reproduction would be like near on impossible.
But we'll see how far we get with a conversation. A new recreation of the moment.
Yeah. So, as you notice, we've got earphones, and the reason for this is so that I can actually hear anything that you say is piped through to my earphones, and anything I say is piped through to your earphones. Imagine. So it's as if we're in this sort of like little bubble, this audio bubble.
It's as if we're like right opposite each other, actually talking to each other. Whispering
and kissing sweet lovelies into each other's ear.
We can stop there if you want.
We can.
The problem is it's Zoom, right? You've just got so used to like having conversations with people where you've got headphones and speakers and webcams and things that now you're like, I'm actually sitting opposite a table with him.
With a human being.
Can we just have headphones and a webcam anyway?
It's like, Jesus Christ.
What has Zoom done to it?
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, we met you through, was it through Rainer Blatt, Sebastian?
Yes.
Yeah. It's Rainer Blatt and David Wineland came round. And Rainer Blatt, you're postdoc student with Rainer Blatt. Maybe you want to go into your background. And your connection with Rainer Blatt, the work that you were doing with him back in Austria.
Yeah. I did my PhD with the National Physical Laboratory in London, building ion traps, and that was a part of a collaboration with 6 different universities around Europe. One of which was Innsbruck. So Innsbruck was using these ion traps that I was building, or at least they were. Full disclosure, the one that I was designing, I don't think that ever worked. But hey, I got a PhD out of it, so we'll go with that. But anyway, so I was building these ion traps, and we were collaborating with Innsbruck for that. So once I'd finished my PhD, I then phoned up Innsbruck and I said, I happen to know that you have this project running, and I happen to know how the project works because I've been working on it for the last little while. Are you interested in a postdoc? So they said yes, and I then moved out to Austria to work with them with designing and building microfabricated ion traps. So I was 2 years there for a postdoc, and then 6 years as an assistant, did my habilitation on future architectures for trapped ion quantum computers, which sounds really exciting.
But isn't.
It is really exciting, but it's really exciting for different reasons.
Go into that.
So there's the standard quantum computers that you use, where like they work, and you turn the handle and Nature papers come out, and they tell you deep truths about the nature of the universe and reality. And like when I first got into physics, like you've got these big questions like, what is the collapse of the wave function? Why does the double slit experiment work? What's actually happening? And these are the sort of big sexy questions of physics that you go, yeah, this is what I want to answer. And one of the really nice things about working in Innsbruck is they really they run these experiments that really get to answer these questions, and it's awesome and it's really exciting. But the problem they were facing basically was they've got these experiments which run, and they could, if they look 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, they said, we can just keep ramping these up and they're going to be awesome, but at some point they're going to hit the wall, and if we don't have something in our back pocket ready for the next generation beyond that, then we're not going to be able to move forward. So my job was to try and look at what the next generation would be, and that was so that the German term is Dreckeffekten, so dirt effect. So I was worried about noise, and I was worried about things not being correctly filtered, and I was worried metallurgy and surface contamination. So it's you're aiming towards these big, deep quantum mechanical mysteries of the universe things, and the thing that's limiting you is you've got a thumbprint on your trap.
Oh, for God's sake! So that which is destroying the vacuum, or what?
It's destroying everything. So yeah, and there were lots of questions where it turns out that when you're trained in quantum mechanics, there are certain things that and you know these deep mysteries of the universe, and you understand the wave function and how things evolve, and it's wonderful. But there are certain things that you don't know, like you don't know how to do metallurgy. So we were doing these things which seemed sensible to us as quantum physicists, and they weren't working. We didn't understand why they didn't work, and then we'd talk to some metallurgists, and they go, well, obviously it didn't work. What kind of moron would try and do that? And then so we had to learn something about metallurgy, and then it still didn't work, and so we'd go to some people who were doing electronic engineering, and we'd say, well, we've got this problem, we don't understand it, and no one understands it, it's this big mystery. And they looked at us and they said, well, I've got an electronics engineering paper here from 1960s that explains it.
Oh.
So it wasn't anything new, it was just new to quantum physicists. And so a lot of what I was doing, it was the metallurgy was known to the metallurgists, and the surface science was known to the surface scientists, and the electronics was known to the electronics people.
Yeah.
And the quantum theory was known to the quantum theorists, and so on and so forth. And the sort of new thing, so to speak, was actually trying to take all of that and put it together, because no one person typically understands all of those things. So for what I was doing, essentially, you look at any bit of it, and someone would say, "Yeah, we knew that." But then it was trying to sort of synthesize all of that together into one thing. Which didn't tell us deep and meaningful things about the nature of the universe and what the wave function is and so on and so forth. But it was fun.
So it was more tangential stuff than actually answering these exciting questions that you wanted to answer, right?
Yes.
But still very interesting.
Right. I mean, the problem was, it became a new question that I wanted to answer. I mean, it just became consuming.
Okay, all-consuming.
I mean,
right.
it's that, I'd go home to my wife of an evening tremendously happy, and she'd say, "Did you find a new heating rate?" And I'm like, "Yes, I've got this." And there was one particular graph that I agonised over for about 4 years, trying to understand this graph about spectral density of electric field noise, which is not on the sort of when you're doing sexy things about collapsing wave functions, right? Collapsing wave functions is cool and weird, and spectral density of electric field noise is not cool and weird. But it just became something which I found tremendously interesting. So I chased that down. And what you're doing, I mean, you're doing physics still. You're doing the same experiments, right? You're building ion traps and you're building lasers and you're looking at spectrometers and things. It's just that the person next door is doing physics to find out the nature of the wave function. You're doing physics to try and find out why your trap doesn't work.
I see. So was there a side of you that was more sort of attracted to the theoretical side?
Heavens no.
Stay the hell away from...
Excuse me. I would... When I was applying to do a PhD, I applied to various people in various groups, and there was one theorist to whom I applied, and at Imperial, and I got an interview, and I'd prepared for the interview. I'd got some of their papers, and I'd read their papers just to see what they were doing, so I could ask sensible questions. And they were doing quantum cavity stuff, and so I pitched my questions, and about 3 minutes into the interview, and she looked at me and she said, "You're an experimentalist, aren't you?" So I was busted. No, not a theorist.
Yeah, it's a completely different sort of way of thinking and approaching the problem entirely.
And it's if you want to know if someone's a theorist or an experimentalist, it's really easy. What you do is you give them a paper, and you say, have you seen this paper before? Do you know anything about this subject, right? And a theorist, they flick through, and they go, "Oh yeah, I recognise equation 7." And experimentalists flick through and they go, "I recognise figure 4."
Yeah.
So the theorists just look at the equations, and the experimentalists just look at the pictures.
Right.
I'm a picture guy.
Yeah. But you've moved out of ion traps for about, nearly 5 years now?
5 years now, just over 5 years.
Yeah. And but you've moved into philosophy kind of thing now, and you sort of like tell us more about this, but more in specific. I kind of want to lean this conversation in the direction of revolves around what we had that conversation that other evening, which was the sort of foundations, the underpinnings of the scientific method, and how the mentality or approach or the Christian mindset actually sort of enabled that to a degree. I thought that conversation was absolutely fascinating, and as an atheist, I thought it was amazing. And I'd like to really sort of go into that and sort of hear your side of things and just sort of get a handle on that.
Yeah. So I mean, like for those people who are watching this and they've been happily listening through to stuff about quantum mechanics and waiting to understand what the wave function is doing, and you're going, from a Christian perspective. Didn't see that coming. So this is now my life now. When you're doing research, you can do the same research as everyone else is doing, and that's not interesting, and it's not particularly helpful because no one wants to fund what everyone else is doing. You need to you need to branch out and do something new and interesting that maybe other people aren't doing, and carve out your niche that's doing something interesting, which according to most funding agencies means something different. and so if you're working on ion traps, you can say, okay, well, let's ion traps is great, but I'm going to work on the electronics of ion traps. This is something new. Or you can say, okay, ion traps is great, but I'm going to work on commercializing the laser systems. Great. Or I'm going to work on understanding heating effects. Great. And so I was looking for what I could do that leveraged my physics background, but would then allow me to step into somewhere new, because there are some people who can try and set up an entire new research group and go toe to toe with Rainer Blatt, but I'm not that person.
Yeah. Not many people are.
not many people are. So if I could sort of find somewhere where I could stick my mark on the world without having to try and be Rainer Blatt or Dave Wineland or someone. And so I love them to bits. Awesome guys. It was a pleasure working with Rainer. He's a brilliant boss. But so I was looking for something where I could go and do something different. And I had a degree in theology because I had free evenings and it seemed fun. And so I was looking and saying, okay, can we take the stuff that I've done with physics, and which has been my day job today, and the stuff that I've done with theology, which has been sort of my evening, weekends hobby, and put those together and actually make that into my new research direction. And there are people who are looking at science and religion. There are lots of really awesome groups doing it. I mean, there are huge numbers of guys in Oxford doing it, in Cambridge, in Harvard, in all over the place. Birmingham, St Andrews, and pretty much no one is looking at it in Asia. I mean, not just not in Hong Kong. I mean, in Asia, it's almost a complete non-question. So in Oxford they have 5 or 6 different research projects, all looking at different aspects of science and religion and how they relate to each other. In one university, whereas on an entire continent, no one's really looking at it. And so I thought, okay, well, here's a niche that I can do. I fly out to Hong Kong, and I look at science and religion and how they interrelate in Hong Kong. And the sort of the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people give is they say, well, science and religion in Hong Kong is the same as science and religion everywhere else, right? Because science is science, right? It's just universal. If Hong Kong science is not doing the same as UK science, then they're doing it wrong, right? And if they are doing it the same as UK science, well, there's nothing new to add. And religion, I mean, Christianity is the same the world over. If Hong Kong Christians are different from UK Christians, then they're probably heretics and they need to get their theology sorted out. So if you're going to go and do that in Hong Kong, then go and look at Buddhism or Confucianism or something we don't do in the UK, right? But the notion that there would be something new and interesting to say from a Hong Kong perspective on science and religion, either because science in Asia isn't exactly the same as science in the UK, or because Christianity in Asia isn't doing exactly the same thing as Christianity in say Europe, or because the way they interact isn't the same, and so I think that by asking these questions within an Asian context, you actually bring something new to the conversation. You can look at it in a new and interesting way, which maybe other people haven't noticed. You find new questions and potentially you find new answers. And even you can then sort of take some of those answers back to maybe Europe or the US and say, guys, you've been worrying about this problem for ages, but you've been thinking about it wrong. If you think, or not wrong, but you've been thinking about it in a particular way, which throws up these problems. And if you think about it differently, like this, then you can maybe solve these problems that you thought were insolvable. Or conversely, you can say, we thought we'd solved this problem and it turns out we haven't. So you have a new question to ask, which is always fun. So this is what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But let's go back. Let's go back into that. Yeah, that's what you're doing now. But let's go back specifically. Like, I recall during that conversation, you would go into sort of like the mentality, like the original day when the Bible sat with a certain weight in one hand, and the physics books sat with the same weight in the other hand, and then over a period of time, in many ways, physics could answer questions that religions no longer could. And the God of the gaps, so to say. But I remember you talking about some of the stuff which was just like how do I sort of get back into that groove of that conversation of the roots of Christianity and how it sort of opened up, how it was. Okay, for example, could the scientific method or the scientific approach be arrived at in a culture other than Christianity?
This is a good question, and this is an open question, and some would say this is a contentious question.
Contentious.
Well,
we do contentious stuff here, don't we?
Well, here's the contention. Right. So if you look at
excuse me.
and it's also a question that I'm going to slightly duck, but
No, that's
bear
fine.
with me. We'll go off in other directions, which are hopefully reasonably interesting for the next 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah.
So here we go. So there's this wonderful enlightenment notion that says the truth is the truth, and which kind of seems obvious. So we'll go with it for a second. And the truth is universal, right? It's 2 + 2 = 4, right? This is no dispute, right? You can't say, well, your 2 + 2 might equal 4, but my 2 + 2 = 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now clearly, if it's true that 2 + 2 = 4, then it's true for everyone, right? It's true for people in Asia, and it's true for people in Europe, and it's true for kind-hearted people, and it's true for murderers. It's true for everyone. So the truth doesn't depend on who you are. So the Enlightenment then takes this and says, well, in that case, so if we're looking for the truth, the joy about science, the grand democratization that science brings is, if you've come from wars splitting Europe, war after war without end, where
Sure.
They're arguing over, is this piece of land mine or yours?
Sure.
And so what they're looking for is they're looking for something where you can take opinion out of it. They're saying we're trying to get to some truth which all reasonable men, and they were thinking of reasonable men, all reasonable men can agree on by sitting down at a table and discussing things.
Would this be the rule of law? We arrive at the rule of law?
No.
Okay.
Because, so with the rule of law, right, England has its rule of law, and France has its rule of law.
Definitely.
And the English rule of law says it's perfectly okay to kill a Frenchman because they're French. I don't know what French law says. We have Sebastian sitting here.
Sebastian, what does French law say about killing English people?
I don't think it says anything about killing English people. I think it's illegal.
But
Okay.
we're just being facetious. We're being facetious.
It's like the legislator want to fix that problem.
Right. So we're not looking for the rule of law,
Mm.
which is a they wouldn't have viewed it like this, but now we'd say, okay, law is some social construct. People get together and they say, okay, we are going to make these laws, and if you break the law, then we're going to bring certain punishments on you, and so on and so forth. Right. So this is a construction of man, and they said, right, we want the rule of something which does not depend on which kind of government you have, and it does not depend on which country you live in, and it does not depend on your religion, and it does not depend on your opinions, and it does not depend on your morality. Right? We want something where we can say, this is the answer, and if you're a murderer, you must accept that this is the answer, and if you're a priest, you must accept that this is the answer, and if you're French, or you're British, or you're German, or you're poor, or you're rich, this is the answer. And if there is something that we can then appeal to, where everyone can say that's the answer, then we don't have any more wars. Because you just sit down and you say, well, look, here is this court of appeal, to use a legal metaphor, this court of appeal. Here is this thing that we appeal to, and everyone can now realise that this piece of land belongs to England, not France. And all men of goodwill can sit down. We don't need to go to war over it. And so they had this notion, and this is then the age of rationality. They said the thing that we appeal to is rationality, right? And mathematics is true for all people, and if a Frenchman has 2 rocks and 2 more rocks, they have 4 rocks. And if an Englishman has 2 rocks and 2 more rocks, they have 4 rocks as well. And mathematics is not dependent on your nationality. And you can't pass a law that says 2 + 2 = 5, right? We don't care about the civil law, what the government says. It's just not true, because 2 + 2 does equal 4. And a Muslim and a Jew and a Christian can all agree that 2 + 2 = 4. And so the great thing is mathematics then, and so numbers and logic are these things which are independent of people. They stand above us. And so this seemed like the great hope for civilization. This seemed like we can get world peace if we say we are going to accept as true all and only things which can be demonstrated to be true. Then we have world peace, right? Because if and anything that you can't demonstrate by rigorous logic to be true, you say, well, clearly that's this woolly thing that's not worth arguing about. It's just some fluffy side issue. And anything which you can demonstrate to be true, then you've demonstrated to be true, and all discussion is done. So this was the plan. And one of the major problems was completely wrong. Spoiler alert.
Because you could just say not.
Well, no. So here's the problem that you get. You say, so coming from the Enlightenment, you work forward and you say, so given that science has this self-correcting nature, as long as you're following this scientific method, it is our royal route to getting the truth. And when science says global warming is happening, there is no dispute to be broked. Sorry, I have to take your thing. Right. When science says global warming is happening, this is the truth. This is what's happening. And all reasonable people, if they don't believe you sit down, you show them the evidence, and then they accept it.
Yeah.
And if they still don't believe you, you sit them down again and you show them the evidence again, and they accept it. And because science has this universal character, this self-correcting character, then it doesn't matter if scientists are corrupt, or if scientists are French, or if scientists are Jewish, or if scientists are whatever, 70 years old, right? Science gives you the correct answer. So you manage to sort of drop scientists out of the equation. Now, the problem that you then have, of course, is, so we've now spent a few hundred years telling people that scientists don't need to be honest, that morality is not a question that enters into science. And now, when a scientist says global warming is happening, people say, I don't trust you. And you say, why not?
Fake news.
Right. You say, well, why not? It's because I have no reason to trust you. Why not? Because I've been told that you may well be completely dishonest.
Or you guys built an atom bomb.
Right. So so for example, if there's big money involved, big wind, right? If
what the hell's big wind?
It's like big oil, but greener.
Oh, big wind as in
big wind,
God,
right? Jesus. Okay. So we know that big tobacco can pay off people to say smoking doesn't cause lung cancer, right? People that build wind turbines have a vested interest in convincing everyone that global warming happens. So we know that science is corruptible. And yet, scientists themselves put their fingers in their ears and go, la 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 la. The morality of a scientist doesn't matter.
Well, we definitely do know that, because during the German World War II, plenty of experiments were done on Jewish people. In China, the Japanese did all sorts of experiments on the Chinese people, and the most horrific of horrific things were done.
Right. And so now, but then, so I'm going to sit and play both sides of the argument just to tease this one apart. So you've got two things going on. One is to say that the experiments that they did are morally bankrupt. Injecting poison into people's eyes just to see what happens, or letting off atom bombs on civilian populations because you don't care about the civilian populations and they're cheap. Yeah. So these are morally problematic experiments to carry out. And that's a relatively easy one to accept. But then the next question up is to say, but the answers they get, right? The answers they get are still the same, right? So a morally bankrupt scientist will inject poison into someone's eye and say, yes, their eye exploded after 25 minutes. Right? And a good scientist, a morally good scientist, could observe the same experiment and come to the same conclusion. So while you have this moral question about should we do this science, there's a separate question about is the answer which we derive from this dependent on my moral standing or my religious beliefs. And so people said your religious beliefs might change questions of the normative questions about whether you should do this, but they don't quite change the descriptive questions about is this what happened? When you do this, does that happen? And so there's this idea within...
What do you mean by that? The descriptive?
Right, so this is Hume's guillotine, the is-ought problem.
Okay.
So, for example, and so that the argument says science just deals with descriptive questions.
Okay.
And not about what is the case, not prescriptive questions about what ought to be the case. So let's take, for example, I can make a prediction. I'm a good scientist. I'm going to do a descriptive.
In other words,
situation.
making models, right?
Well, so let's say I have a model that says if you keep on cutting down bamboo forests at the rate we're going, within 10 years, pandas will be extinct. Now, that's a good scientific statement because you can test it, right? You keep on cutting down bamboo forests at this rate, and 10 years later you go back and you go, you know what, we have no more pandas.
That science was good.
Good science.
Yeah.
Right? But it's terrible conservation. Right? So you have, on the one hand, you've got the descriptive question that says this is the case. If you keep on doing this, we're going to run out of pandas. But there's a separate question, the normative question as to what should be the case, namely, therefore we should stop chopping down bamboo.
Yeah.
Right. And science traditionally is very, very bad at engaging with these ought questions, these should questions.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I see what you mean now.
And so you can ask the question of, if I inject poison into someone's eye, will their eye explode? Yes, no.
Yeah.
Right? It's a different question from should I inject poison into someone's eye?
Yeah.
Right? And so the argument says that these normative questions cannot be decided by rationality.
Okay.
A Jew might say one thing, and a Zoroastrian might say another, and a Muslim might say another. Right?
Yeah.
So different religious perspectives disagree on these normative questions, but on the descriptive questions as to will we actually run out of pandas, everyone agrees. And so from the logic of the Enlightenment that said, if you can prove it by logic, then this is a thing worth arguing about, and we argue logically and then we sit down and we're done. And if you can't prove it by logic, then this is just some fluffy nonsense that we don't care about. But what you've done here is you've just removed from the discussion all normative questions about what we should do, how we should live, how I should act when I wake up in the morning. And one might turn around and say, I am not totally comfortable with removing from all discussion those questions. There are some people who genuinely think that we should look after pandas. And to be told, no, that's not a real question to be discussed, is a problem for them. So that's what I mean by the is, ought, normative, descriptive thing.
So what happens when you remove the descriptive entirely and you just left with this, well, that is ought to? Then one could reduce the entire society to this this sort of social justice warrior mentality, this woke mentality. Am I right?
Right. So.
Or you sitting very uncomfortably in that chair there.
No. So here's what I'd say is, there are people who would say, okay, we're just going to go for the is. We're just going to talk about what is. And there are other people who say, what is doesn't matter, right? You create your own future. We have agency. We have choice. We make the world in which we live. We're going to do out, and we're going to claim the world that ought to be. We will make the world just and right and good. And the problem that the people on one side hit when they say we're just going to deal with what is the case is you then have problems getting up in the morning, because it is the case that if you lie in bed all day, you get fat and die of a heart attack, right? Yeah. But if you're not allowed to make ought statements, you can't say therefore you ought to get out of bed and do something. Damn it!
I see.
So just trying to live in a world of is statements becomes very difficult because you can't do anything. And this is so. For example, this is a problem where we're talking about science and religion. We had to come around to evolution at some point. There's a question when you just look at the naturalistic side of evolution. There's an argument that say, the strong survive. If your granny is weak, your granny will die. Right? That is an is statement. Right? But it doesn't tell me what I ought to do. It doesn't tell me if I ought to look after my granny. It doesn't tell me if I ought to, when she's sick, go round and bring her some food. Right? So while evolution can say it is the case that people who are weak and have no one to look after them will die, that in its own doesn't tell me whether or not I should go and be nice to my granny. So people who just want to stick to the is side of the world have a problem. But people who just want to stick to the ought side of the world also have a problem. Because we beat ourselves against a real physical universe that doesn't care about what we think. So it ought to be the case that when I say sensible things, everyone listens to me. And you know what? I can say that ought to be the case for as long as I want, but it isn't the case. And I can say, it ought to be the case that my tea stays hotter for longer. Right? I beat myself against the laws of physics. Right? The laws of physics do what the laws of physics do. Yeah. And my desire for ought doesn't change that. So we live in this world where some people just want to say we're just going to go for is, and some people say we're just going to go for ought. And in fact, we live in this world where we have to say, right, that we bring them both together and we wrestle in this tension between the two. And social justice warriors are very good at one, and scientistic people are very good at the other, and both of them are failing to connect with reality as it presents itself to us.
Okay. How do you find that middle ground? Is that basically what you're sort of studying at the moment? Is how to introduce it such that, for example, I've thought about, I'm not saying I'm any authority on the subject, but wouldn't it be good to have a society where one steers the scientific process such that human beings live in harmony with nature? Like, this is an ought statement, very much an ought statement. But yet it factors in nature as it is, the fundamental laws of nature, and like understanding or comprehending and copying them. Like, is there some sort of like statement that one could sort of arrive at that equally takes an equal weight on both sides, and one can sort of advance forward?
Right. So this is then where good question. This is where things start to get interesting.
Is it another contentious question? By the way, you successfully dodged that last one. Yes. Masterfully.
Next, bring them on. I'm on a roll. So I'm gonna dodge this one less. Because this is an interesting one.
Okay.
So okay. If it's another way of framing that is ought, and this is then I'll haul into this. Ow, my glasses are stuck in my headphones. Who'd have thought? Okay, so this is then where
that's an is statement. That is.
Yes.
Keep going. God, that was so lame. Keep going.
I ought not to distract you during this interview.
Oh God, we're gonna keep going in the circle then. Yeah.
It is a bad idea.
Oh, I'm not gonna respond.
Okay, so this is right. Okay, so on this is ought dichotomy. Now there is a perspective which says, okay, is statements belong to science? Science talks about what is the case. It is the case that if I drop something, it will accelerate towards the ground. And one can't say that is a good or bad thing, right? No one says it's good that gravity works. Gravity just works. There is no ought about it, right?
Yeah.
So the laws of physics are simply pure is statements. So is statements are the realm of science. And you can test them. And they do everything that one wants of science. Ought statements, so this argument goes, are the realm of religion, right? Thou ought not kill. Or
Thou shalt not
thou
kill.
shalt not kill. Okay. You ought to be kind to your granny. So this is an argument that says that as soon as you get into ought things, right, you can't, right, there's no test that you can do, there's no experiment that you can do that lets you test whether it's true that you ought to look after your granny, right? You know, you can make a prediction about something falling. You can say, you know, if I drop my granny out the window, then she'll fall and hit the pavement below. If I do that, then I'll get arrested. But we can't make any ought statements about you ought not do that. Well, you can't test any ought statements about you ought not do that. So then you say, okay, now this is the realm of religion. And the reason why this was problematic in the Enlightenment is people said, well, these ones we can test, therefore we can come up with some definitive answer. And these ones we can't test, so we're going to have to still go to war about these. So war is the remit of religion, and agreement and rationality is the remit of science.
Okay.
So I'm glad you're looking uncomfortable with that statement. We'll,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm letting you expand before I...
Right, but this is the argument that people set up. They said is statements are testable, and they are the remit of science.
Okay.
And they are, so you have facts, you have testability, you have objectivity, you have public demonstrable knowledge, you have rationality.
Right.
And on the other side, you have these ought statements, which cannot be tested. They are untestable. These are now the grounds of belief, which means we're in the realms of religion. This is subjective. This is personal. And these are the kind of things that you can go to war on if you're not a well-adjusted person. And clearly these are different. And so now and this sets up why people talk about science and religion, because they're clearly two completely different things, right? One's over here and one's over here, and near the twain shall meet. And so my first argument says, but we live in a world where we have to keep a hand on both. So in one argument then is to say, okay, so we need both science on the one hand and religion on the other, because we are confronted both by the universe and by the necessity to actually do something. And so we need to bring science and religion together. So it's Einstein who said that science without religion is, now I'm going to screw up the quote, was it science without religion is...
Science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme.
There you go.
Good. Wait.
That was Einstein, right?
That was who? Sorry?
Albert Einstein?
I think that's Einstein.
Yes. Yeah. Science without conscience is just wound of the soul or something like that. I only know the French version of it because I had it on a poster.
We'll say the French.
Science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
There you go, wonderful. So you've got this idea that says that you need both. That science without religion is sunken, religion without science is sunken, and you need to hold these two together. And so that's a reasonably standard position within sort of science and religion discourse. I am not quite sure I agree with it, and so here's why. Because it relies on this dichotomy of science is over here making is statements, and religion is over here making ought statements, and I'll deal first with why religion wants to make is statements, and then I'll come to why science wants to make ought statements.
Okay.
And so the direction I'm going here is to say, in fact, this standard dichotomization we have, where we tell ourselves that we can hold these two worlds separate, breaks down, and it breaks down radically, so that we end up being able to point to things and saying, I don't know if that is science or if that's religion or both or neither or some horrible mish, and I don't even know what words mean anymore. So this is where I'm heading.
Yeah, let's
Right.
do it.
So if by the end of this year I don't know what words mean anymore, then I've succeeded. Okay, so here we go. So within religion, I mean, take Christianity as an example. Christianity makes definitive is statements, right? It is a historic religion. It is grounded in history, and it makes claims like Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. This is not an ought statement. This is not Jesus should have been raised from the dead. This is not Jesus shouldn't have been killed. This is an actual is statement of he was raised from the dead. Now, you can disagree with that. You can say, but he wasn't. But to say Jesus wasn't raised from the dead is also an is statement. It is not true that he was, right? So, but now this discussion of Christianity has moved from ought statements to is statements. And if you say, well, as soon as you come into is statements, you stop being religious, well, then you suddenly have to say that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead is not a religious statement. And I know people who would be unhappy with that. I know religious people would be unhappy with that, and I know non-religious people who would be unhappy with that. So we find ourselves saying, okay, I have here an is statement, which is clearly religious, or we deeply, deeply want it to be religious. Okay, and then on the other hand, if you take something like, let's return to our pandas. So I commented on killing off these pandas that it was great science but lousy conservation. But now you have people who want to do conservation science, and if so, conservation necessarily talks about normative statements. You should stop burning coal. You should look after pandas. You should save the whale. You shouldn't import pangolins or eat uncooked bat. Right? It wants to make ought statements.
Right.
If it doesn't make ought statements, it's not doing conservation. And yet it wants to be scientific. It wants to ground itself in is statements. And so what you have to do is you say, well, okay, we have some options. Either conservation science needs to stop doing conservation. And I know people are unhappy with that. Or you say conservation science needs to stop doing science. And I know people are unhappy with that. Or you say conservation science has at its very core a fundamental contradiction and itself is meaningless and paradoxical. And I know people who are unhappy with that. Or you say we need to redefine the remit of science so that we can have conservation science as a science which nonetheless speaks about and engages with statements of what we ought to do. And I know people who are unhappy with that, but there are fewer people who are unhappy about that than people who are unhappy about saying conservation science shouldn't do conservation. So here we have this blurring. On the one hand, science that starts trying to make ought statements, and I this would be a contentious statement, but I would argue appropriately, it is appropriate for science in certain situations to make ought statements, and religion, which appropriately makes is statements. So now we sort of see these blurring of the two. And so the interesting thing about coming to Asia to do this is Asia never had the Enlightenment. So in Europe, prior to the Enlightenment, this blurring of this mixing of these categories between objective and subjective and normative and descriptive and is and ought and science and religion and fact and value, all of this was mixed together.
And it's persisted till today.
And so in Europe, it was all mixed together, and the Enlightenment then separated them out and did great damage to the world while doing so. Whereas in Asia, because the Enlightenment never happened, they're still very much more mixed. So now we're kind of looking at this world that never had the vandalism of the Enlightenment visited upon it.
Interesting you mentioned vandalism. I am trying to formulate a question. Why do you call it vandalism? This is very interesting. Yeah, because like if you, for example, if you look at Japanese people who haven't undergone this sort of like this enlightenment process. I mean, if you look at the samurai, the samurai, they're sort of, to them there is no distinction between peace and war.
Okay, we're well out of my.
No, I know. I'm trying to.
I'll roll with this.
I'm trying to. I don't even know what I'm just rolling too.
Okay,
but like, for example, like the Japanese culture is very much like sort of in connection with nature and gods of nature and all sorts of the forest god and all these sorts of things, and there is no sort of divide between spirit and body and mind. It's all one thing, essentially. Do you think that when you say the vandalism of the Enlightenment, are you referring to the separation or concepts of the spirit, the mind, the concepts of the soul, etc., and how individuals are now so disconnected from their own individual selves that we do not even find meaning, even though we've got the wonders of a harnessed scientific world around us, and yet people are committing suicide, essentially. Is this what you're referring to by vandalism of the Enlightenment?
Yes.
Oh.
Like, after all these long answers, I'm going to go the short one. Yes.
Dude, you just left me stranded there, man. It's like I try to prime a lot of ground for you there, and you just left me hanging there, man.
Okay, so let me feel that for the nice ones you've set up for me. I'll take a swing at them. So yeah, I mean, if you look at because the world. As I said right at the beginning, the world in which we live has this interconnected character. If we just hang on to one or just hang on to the other, we end up, being smacked by the other half of the world and not even knowing what's smacking us, right?
No, okay, I lost you.
Sorry. So if I sit and I want to be, if I just take the aught side.
Okay. Oh, we'll be back to the is-ought thing.
If I'm this justice,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
Back to the is-ought, right? If I'm going to be this justice warrior,
right?
I get frustrated because. Right, there are brute facts of the universe which come against me, right? And having separated them, I'm like, but I'm talking about what should be the case, and the universe says, I don't care what you're talking about. I'm going to keep on smacking you.
Just as other people are looking at you and saying, I couldn't give a darn flying flamingo what you think about what color hair I should have.
Right, or yeah, I could give some examples that would really get me in hot water, but
I know what you're gonna.
Right, there are examples where people say, I want to be treated in this way,
yeah,
and what we want and how we are actually treated are not the same.
Yeah.
I was. Yeah, we're not going to go down that route.
No, that's not.
So right, and the same is true on the other side. You live on this side of what is. Right, and you lose the humanity, the very notion of what one should do, what one ought to do, why one does something, the notion of purpose, the notion of meaning, the notion of hope, the notion of getting up in the morning for a reason. And the problem is, for all that you cling to the is side, right, the universe in which we live, for whatever reason, is one where humans only really operate if they have a reason to get up in the morning. And so by separating out these two, by saying you can deal with this independent of dealing with this, which is what the Enlightenment tried to do, by separating these out, it's to use a bad metaphor, it's if you take someone's brain and you say, right, I'm just going to snip between the two hemispheres. You've got the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and I'm sure they don't need to talk to each other.
No, who needs that?
Right. So this is what I mean by vandalism. You have these two things which are tightly interwoven, and in the universe, the universe interweaves them tightly, and we say we're going to unpick them, and we're going to act like that's okay, and like we can walk through the universe with this separated thing. And the universe says, well, you walk through the universe like that, but you're going to get smacked by a whole lot of stuff that you didn't see coming.
I see what you mean now. Okay.
And yes, I mean, taking for example, with the notion of gods and nature gods and so on and so forth, of all these, the distinctions that I gave previously about science and religion and is and ought and public and private and fact and value. Another distinction which turns up is looking at natural and supernatural, or body and spirit is another one.
Right.
And so the Enlightenment tries to tell us that there is this thing called natural, and there's this other thing called supernatural. And different people might, and now we've just taken that on, right? Now some people say, okay, there's this thing called natural. So let's say religious people, like if you Christian says, okay, there's this natural stuff and there's this supernatural stuff. And an atheist might say, well, okay, there are these two categories of natural and supernatural, and this category contains nothing.
Because I can't verify it. I can't.
For whatever reason. There's a whole pile of reasons why they might say that.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, okay, we have natural and supernatural, and everything that's in the universe is natural.
Right.
And religious people might say, okay, there's natural and supernatural, and both things exist in the universe. But this is a very strange idea, and in fact, the closer you look at it, it becomes incredibly difficult to actually pin down what we mean by the distinction between natural and supernatural. And so, for example, people say, well, natural is the stuff that science looks at, and supernatural is the stuff that religion looks at. But that then becomes problematic. I like your furrowed brow.
You like my what? Sorry.
Furrowed brow. Problematic, you say. So if you take science for example. So we say, okay, well, the stuff that, how can we define natural? What is natural, right? So God is supernatural, miracles are supernatural, the soul is supernatural, okay, and tables and atoms and electric fields, they're natural. And so we've got this distinction. But for each time you do that, you end up with, there's always these sort of liminal boundary cases where you go, So, for example, as science has progressed, it said, okay, there's this stuff that we understand. I mean, broadly speaking, over the thumb definition of natural is the stuff that science can talk about.
Okay.
Right? So 150 years ago, right, we could talk about steam engines, and we could talk about mechanical power and so on and so forth. And so you had atoms in motion, right? You've got mass is real, and time is real, and space is real.
Yeah.
Right. Why do we call our system the MKS system? Right. We're talking about mass, space, time. So M for order was wrong, but M for space. So we're talking about mass, space, and time. These things are real, right? And you can, sorry, I've just screwed up your mics, right? But they're things that you can hit. They're real things, and everything else, like the soul and belief and gods and things, they're supernatural. And then, Maxwell worked really hard to say, well, okay, electric fields, or I didn't say electric fields. He said, okay, how can we understand magnets? How can we understand electricity? How can we understand this thing that's going on in a gold leaf?
Talking about ether, right, and all that stuff.
I'm not going to get to ether yet.
Okay.
So, well, I am, but not for the sake of ether. But what Maxwell tried to do was he tried to come up with a mechanical description of light.
Okay.
And the reason he tried to come up with a mechanical description of light was very simple. Light is natural. Light is real. I mean, God might have said, let there be light at the beginning, but ever since then, light is not a supernatural thing, right? So we feel that light should be something that science can talk about, which means it's natural, which means it's got to be talked about in terms of mass, space, and time. It's got to be talked about in mechanical properties. And because anything that's not these three things is some weird, spooky thing that's not real. And he worked very hard, and in the end, so he comes up with a field description of it. And so there's this big argument about what fields are. But in the end, long story short, so we say, okay, well, there's this thing called charge. Right? Charge, energy I can reduce to mass, space, and time. Kilogram meters per second squared, we're good. Force, I can reduce to mass, space, and time. Right? Kilogram meters per second, we're good. Speed, I can reduce to mass, space, and time, meters per second. We're all good. All of these mechanical things you can reduce to mass, space, and time, and they're real. And now the problem that you have with electric fields is suddenly you've got this extra thing here of charge. And so you now say, okay, we've got a couple of options. Option 1, we can reduce charge to mass, space, and time. Option 2, we can't reduce it to mass, space, and time, which means charge isn't real. Or maybe charge isn't natural. Or charge is some supernatural thing, because natural things can be reduced to mass, space, and time. Or option 3 is there's something else which is natural but can't be reduced to mass, space, and time. And obviously history says we went for option 3. But here we suddenly see that which is natural is flexible. Right? We can change it. So our notion of saying natural is whatever science can talk about actually turns out to be more right than we anticipated, because now we're saying, okay, well, as long as science can talk about this bit, this is natural, and all this stuff out here is not. We're going to call it supernatural, as more than natural. Okay, but as soon as science says, oh, we can talk about this as well, then this extra bit here suddenly stops being supernatural and becomes natural. Right? The universe hasn't changed, it's just our ability to talk about things that's changed. And spooky action at a distance. What is entanglement? Right? Well, as soon as physicists get a handle on something, as soon as they say we're comfortable talking about this, well, suddenly it becomes natural. Right? ESP. Right? Now, we don't have a handle on this. We can't talk about it. Physicists aren't comfortable talking about it, so they say, well, that's clearly something supernatural and spooky. But if ever we did find these empathic fields, we found electrical fields, we found gravitational fields, if ever we did say, oh, look, I've got this detector that goes ping when it gets hit by an empathic field. If at any point physicists became comfortable talking about empathic fields, then suddenly ESP would not be supernatural, it would be natural. Now, the universe hasn't changed, we've just changed what we're happy talking about.
Right.
Now, that would then say, let's say we managed to find the soul. Let's say that whatever developments in science happen to that, and this isn't because with taking charge, right? This isn't because we can reduce charge to something within science. This is just because we stretch science a bit. So let's say that the soul is nothing physical, it's nothing material. It really is something, by current standards, supernatural. Right? But let's say one day someone discovers something that is the soul. Right? Have we proved that supernatural exists? No. Because once we're happy talking about it, we just say, oh, well, that's natural.
Yeah.
Right? Let's imagine, however it might work, let's imagine one day someone manages to prove that God exists. Right? And they get this detector that goes ping and says, there's God. Right? As soon as scientists are happy talking about it, well, God's not supernatural anymore. He's just natural. Right? So in fact, to say this is natural says nothing about the universe and everything about what we're comfortable talking about. And so it turns out to be this definition which tells you about me, but not about the world.
Yeah. It's very me-centric.
Right. So from that point of view, to tell me something about the world, to say this is natural, this is supernatural, turns out to be relatively unhelpful. And so using that as a difference between science and religion, where we say, okay, well, science talks about natural things and religion talks about supernatural things. Well, that's really not quite true. And if it is true by some definition of natural and supernatural, it's not helpful. And if you look at, religion says go and help the poor, right? Go and feed the sick. Right? This is as natural and as mundane, as down to earth as you can hope for. Right? But if you say, well, no, feeding the poor is not a religious act because it's not supernatural, well, you have a different understanding of religion to Mother Teresa. So clearly she was doing something religious, but it was also a natural act.
Yeah.
And so this, you mentioned God of the gaps earlier. So this thing comes back to that. In fact, we have the opposite problem.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
It's not that we have a God of the gaps. It's the science of the non-gaps. Right? Anything we can talk about, we call science. And anything we can't talk about, we say this is a gap. Right? And in fact, just to show that it's not a one-way street, if you look at, for example, you mentioned ether, right? So we had, you know what causes gravity, right? It's ether.
Do we? Oh, okay.
Historically,
Right.
Okay. We say we know what causes gravity. It's ether, right? And we know what ether is. We can talk about it. It's these corpuscles that go around, and you've got these vortices in it, and that's fine. So we can talk about it. So that the source of gravity is science, or the source of gravity is a scientific topic. We say this ether rightly belongs in science. Right? And then later on, you say, well, okay, I have an equation that says F equals gmm over r squared, right? And you say, well, what's the mechanism for that? You say, well, you can't ask about the mechanism.
We just know the behavior.
It's just the equation.
Yeah.
It's just the behavior. The mechanism for this is not a scientific question.
Shit.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, it used to be a scientific question, and suddenly it stopped being because we weren't happy talking about it anymore. And then, all of a sudden...
Why did it stop?
Because we weren't happy talking. So as you go through different theories...
Doesn't this like sort of like kill curiosity at some point? And you become a very boring scientist, very dull and dry. Would a Richard Feynman agree to that? I mean,
right. So this is okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is a whole nother topic
Oh,
as to
okay.
why it stops.
Oh, right.
That's.
Shall I just let you continue surfing that wave?
Let's bounce across this one for a bit, and we'll come back to why to curiosity, the role of curiosity in science. We'll do that in a minute.
All right.
Okay. So but so if you look at with Newton. What shape is space-time is not a question. It's not a question you can ask. And then all of a sudden along comes Einstein. He says it is a question you can ask. Right. So it's not that you have this sort of God of the gaps. It's that science does this wonderful trick that says as long as I'm comfortable giving you an answer to that question, I shall tell you it's a proper question to ask. But as soon as my theory changes so that I don't know the answer, I'll tell you it's not a proper question.
Okay.
And so I would call this science of the non-gaps.
Right.
Right. Yes. Where were we? So okay, I'm just going to quickly. You set me up for this big thing, and then I gave you a short answer, and you wanted a long answer. So I'm gonna finally pick through that big setup you gave me.
Good.
A long time ago. Okay, so talking about deities, so this gets fun as well.
Yeah.
In as much as are gods supernatural?
Dude, like I set up this earphone system so I would be able to hear things clearly. Can you please repeat that question? I'm going to turn up the volume.
No,
I just heard him coughing there.
You didn't mishear it. I really asked the question: are gods supernatural?
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, is he supernatural as well? Because I accept that he's a god.
My answer is more than one sentence. My answer is more than one sentence in the sense that, and I wanted to actually open up on this on the next question I was going to ask you. I might as well open it up now. So what's applicable to my own sort of life? We were talking about me-centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, decisions and sort of mental structures and constructs that I come up with essentially are so that I can stay alive. I can continue living in this world healthy and as good as I can. And if my paradigm of thinking was brought up in a civilization or a society that had this sort of thing, and I had developed the habitual behavior to refer to these entities and things, then it would be natural. It wouldn't be supernatural, I suppose. But now we discuss about it in this perspective where I don't think that these entities or these so-called things have any sort of influence on me. Then I would say, yeah, okay, it's a supernatural thing. It's something it's of no relevance to me.
And so this is something where, again, where
Wait. I can go onto that further. how do I do this? But in the sense that, you could also say that maybe those entities that you might refer to might epitomize or exemplify. Epitomize, that's the one. Epitomize or exemplify, or make an example of the best sort of character. So it would be an archetype kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
If we're going to go in that direction, then sure, it's not a real thing, but it is a successful strategy or behavior in life that if one does adopt or utilize, and it is represented by this thing, then it's a real thing.
So it's some ideal that people have created in their minds as a mental construct towards which they can strive for.
Yeah, but more so, one can actually create, in times without internet, one can actually create these gods, and it serves a single purpose of passing these knowledge and lessons that one has derived throughout generations. So, stories by the fireside get created so that you're able to pass on successful strategies that you and your generations thereafter don't go and kill yourselves because, like if you don't do this, the young people will rise up and burn down your village and everybody in the village dies, kinds of things. Why? Because we had that several generations ago.
Right. We now create this story which includes and therefore inculcates this teaching into future generations.
Right. Yeah.
When that thing itself is forgotten, but we now pass this knowledge on.
Yeah, exactly. So it becomes a vessel, a mimetic vessel to communicate evolutionary information, like stuff that'll keep you alive. Memes, yeah.
In the original.
In the original sense, yes. The mimetic, the Richard Dawkins mimetic information.
Right. So that's a sort of anti-realistic picture of gods.
Okay.
In terminology here. So when I talk about realistic and anti-realistic in this context, I say that the anti-realistic side is the one where it is some social discourse thing that we have constructed that doesn't need to appeal to anything in the external world.
Right.
Whereas a realistic one says we're actually appealing to something that really exists.
Okay.
And I mean neither term disparagingly. I'm very happy with anti-realistic theories about lots of things. So here you've got an anti-realistic picture of gods, where you say gods are these social constructions which serve very useful purposes of passing this information on.
This is very much a Neil Gaiman kind of thing, like. Yeah.
And so what you then get is if you take, let's take. So I'm now going to appeal to someone like C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis, Christian writer.
Yeah.
But he was very comfortable with the existence, the real existence of non-Christian deities.
Okay.
So for example, if you look in, for example, the Chronicles of Narnia, the characters include nymphs and dryads, and Pan and Bacchus turns up.
Yeah.
Right. So he was, and Aslan sends Bacchus off to go and do whatever task. So he has. So Lewis has this notion of divinities as genuine, real creatures, as the spirits of trees being real things. And so a lot of Christians now would say, okay, well, maybe I believe that I have a soul, but I don't believe in Christianity. It's okay to accept that trees have a soul or that rocks have a soul. Whereas, so now, to try and, having said that the natural-supernatural dichotomy is not a helpful one, to come to one within Christianity, which is actually then the one that Christianity traditionally would have used, is to say the distinction it draws is not between natural and supernatural, it's between created and creator. So you then say, if I have a rock, that is a created object. If I have a demon, that is a created object. Now, the modern natural supernatural would say clearly demons are supernatural. until we find words in which to describe them, which go, oh yeah, okay, we're comfortable talking about those. We're going to call them natural.
Okay.
So within Christianity, a rock is a created thing. A demon is a created thing. A dryad, if they exist, is a created thing. An animal is a created thing. And then the one that's different is God, who is the creator. But smaller divinities, if they exist, would be created beings, and there's nothing within a Christian religious framework that says that wouldn't be the case. And if you look historically, particularly the further back you go into Jewish thinking, the notion that you had these other lesser deities.
Well, then wouldn't you say the Big Bang is God then?
No.
Why not? If it's all originated from the Big Bang, that's the original.
Right. So the classification I had before was to say the two things you have are creator and created.
Oh.
And the Big Bang is not the creator. The Big Bang is created.
Okay,
it might be the first moment of the universe, but it isn't.
Yeah, so you're only looking at one.
Isn't creative.
Yeah, so you're only looking at one sort of step of creation, right? Okay, like let's just sort of our viewpoint is only like between creator and created. Now, I weave this handkerchief, and now I am its creator, essentially, right? So,
as an analogy, I'm going to accept that, but if the analogy gets pushed too far, I'm going to come back to it. Go for it.
You're gonna slap it around, and that's fine. But I might create this handkerchief and it lasts for 100 million years, such that everything that ever comes in contact with it completely loses all context that surrounds that. And indeed the creator might itself pass away, but this thing persists. And then some sort of random story gets formed up around it. Do you see what I mean? Essentially what I'm trying to say is that there's a long chain of events and everything, just like the life, the evolution of life. You can see the whole tree of evolution. It all originates from one thing. Am I not this thing's God?
So there's a
the creator.
I'm going to take a slight detour into a joke, if I may. There was a biologist who having worked very hard on genetics and so on and so forth, had worked out how to create life in the lab. And so they rocked up to God and they went, okay, God, you reckon you're so good because you can create life. Well, I can do it too. So rematch. Okay, I'm going to show you that I can create life and then I'm going to become God.
Yeah.
God said, fair enough. Because, he's kind of a chill guy. So God says, fair enough. And so this biologist says, okay, here we go. Just like you, okay, from the dirt, I can just take a handful of dirt and I can create a living being. So the biologist takes some dirt and God says, hang on. Use your own dirt.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah, I see.
You, in manufacturing that handkerchief, have not created that handkerchief. You have just taken pre-existing stuff and made something else out of it.
I hear what you're saying, but that's why I refer to the Big Bang as the original creator, because you can read, was it Sam Harris's book, where he says everything from nothing. Mm-hmm. And he goes about documenting each of the steps, like you can from the Big Bang there's nothing, maybe there's like and from literally nothing, like these, I suppose, quantum fluctuations happen, and then maybe little things of hydrogen start to form, and then they sort of coalesce, and then they sort of collapse, and maybe gravity starts to form, and stars start to form, and then you get your supernovas, which generate all sorts of things, and it describes the entire process of the creation of life. And going back to that one example of a biologist, I believe that, so under the assumption that you've already gone through all of these things and you've created this world with them consisting of the two most common elements, which is hydrogen and oxygen, which formed to create water. They managed to recreate a similar sort of environment, which would sort of spark life. The initial conditions that are required for life to sort of, under the hypothesis that life was formed underneath the warm sulfur vent at the bottom of the ocean, kind of thing. Anyway, we might be going a little bit too much into the creator thingy, and I think we might be getting a bit lost at the moment, and I should probably just and let you keep rolling.
Yes, so just to wrap that up, so the reason I went into that was not to try and get into origins, because there's enough to be said on origins. But the distinction there to draw was between, rather than saying between natural and supernatural, to say between creator and created. Okay. But that then, and the reason I brought that up was to come back to your question about samurai and so on and so forth, that have this much more holistic view of the world, and to say that, for example, even if we have souls and spirits and so on and so forth, they would not, they might be supernatural because science isn't yet comfortable talking about them, but within the sort of a Christian ontological framework, they would simply come under created beings, and we're okay with that. Okay. Yes, that was why I was going in that direction.
Okay. But remember that ploughed field, and I gave you have you concluded that?
Yeah, we're done with that. I think we've covered that one.
All right. Damn it! I would normally be thinking about other questions now and sort of driving into this. I got sidetracked by this, and I wanted to ask. So going back to this is an aught thing. This is an aught thing. Can one create? Can one create a sort of a way of looking at things such that? Oh yeah. Now we're going. Okay, so in the situation with religion, you mentioned in the Bible or in religious contests, they are actually making is statements. The scientific method, the scientific body, had not sort of been arrived at that point, and would that have been a rudimentary framework that individuals would have used to be able to rationalize or see the world around them, to reason the world around them? Yeah. I mean, are you not comparing an outdated, rough methodology to a modern, evolved methodology? Do you see what I mean?
Yes. So there's this thing called the myth of progress.
Okay.
And so I would not refer to what did happen 6,000 years ago as a rough, outmoded methodology, and I don't think I'd refer to what we do now as whatever it was, a more polished methodology.
Okay.
Shall I try that again?
Go for it.
I'm going to put words in a sentence. You ready? There's a wonderful lie that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
That says we're actually getting somewhere.
Okay. Are we just biting our tails?
Maybe. So I'll give an example as to why we tell this lie.
Uh-huh.
And science textbooks are awesome at telling this lie, but they tell it for a reason. They tell it for a very good reason.
Uh-huh.
Very
funding.
Good reason. Close. No, surprisingly, textbooks don't do it for funding. Textbooks do it for educational purposes.
Oh, to motivate the student.
If you can lie to your students for educational purposes, that makes it okay. So here you go. So if you look at what science does, I mean, science is a mess. Science is a hideous mess. I mean, go back to my own personal experience of Dreck-effekten, right? My research is going to be when the history of quantum computers is writ. Right? My research is not going to be in it because mine was looking at 10 different ways of why things didn't work. Right? Now if you go off and you go, okay, we're going to try this and it didn't work, and we're going to try this and it didn't work, right? And so you have all these weird random bushes as to what didn't work. Now when you're writing a textbook, right, the purpose of a textbook is not to get kids to understand that the whole thing is a terrible mess. The purpose of a textbook is to get kids to understand what we currently think is the case.
Yeah.
Right? And if you if you can sum up in half a page what we currently think the case is, then a 30-page history that goes down every blind alley is just going to confuse them. That will be a bad textbook.
Yeah.
So what you do is you say, right, okay, well, here's where we are now, and here's where we used to be. And if I draw a line between here and here, right, then there's this person, this person, this person, this person, this person, right? So we can tell people the progression of science. And so we write this history, and it's a mnemonic as much as anything. It's a pedagogical tool to help kids remember. Okay, if we can kind of remember the how we got to here, then that helps us put some context in it, and helps us to remember this. But for teaching purposes, to help you remember this, it doesn't matter if any of this is true. So, for example, Michelson-Morley experiment. Now, Michelson-Morley experiment was famous. We're getting back to ether again. Right, it's famous because there was this idea that...
Please explain what it is.
Okay, wonderful. So there was this idea that you had ether, and there should be an ether wind. And so Michelson and Morley set out to measure the ether wind, and using an interferometer. And they could not measure it. There was zero ether wind.
Don't you need a laser for an interferometer?
No, you need to be smart if you don't have a laser, but you can do it.
How the hell do you create an interferometer without a laser?
You can do a white light interferometer.
Oh shit, yes you can. Good
Yes, you can.
grief. Yes you can. Wow.
I mean, lasers were 1962.
Shit.
Interferometers have been going for a very long time.
Fascinating.
There you go. So they set up this interferometer, and they managed to show. So the story goes, they managed to show there was no ether wind, and they managed to show that there's no such thing as the ether, and they managed to show then that relativity is true.
Yeah.
And that's great. And we all read this story in all the textbooks.
Okay.
And the nice thing is, just out of interest, have you ever read Michelson and Morley's original paper?
No.
Because it contains. I think most people write the textbooks that have never read it either. And I know that because Michelson and Morley's original paper said, in their conclusion, we have hereby demonstrated that the ether exists.
Is this not the case of Aboriginal tribes passing the stories down the line?
Right. Yes.
And maybe some story details got missed.
But there's a reason why they misinterpret the story. So it was they skew the story because they want the students to understand this idea, not the truth of how we got to this idea.
Okay.
In fact, I mean, there's a wonderful paper by Einstein he wrote in 1921, where again you look at the history, and the history people always say, well, Maxwell demonstrated with his equations that you don't need ether. And then Einstein managed to demonstrate with relativity that you don't need ether, and Michelson and Morley gave the experimental demonstration that there is no ether. And this is all pointing to no ether, which is great, except that Maxwell wrote in Encyclopaedia Britannica several years after he developed his wave equations. He developed his wave equations using an ether theory. They were actually ether equations. Michelson and Morley gave an experimental demonstration, so they claimed at the time that they had demonstrated the ether did exist, and proposed further experiments to characterize the ether. And Einstein in 1921 wrote this paper claiming that he'd been concerned about special relativity because special relativity is not an ether theory, but he was now very glad with general relativity because general relativity is an ether theory, and therefore he had managed to save the ether. Now that story never gets told in the textbooks, because what we want to explain is we want to explain some story, some folklore, myth, call it what you will, to help people remember how we got to here. There was a reason for me going down this rabbit trail. I'm just trying to think what it was. What was the question?
Oh Jesus. We were talking about the is aught thing, the rudimentary.
Progress. Yeah, sorry. I should get a pen and just take notes, just to remind myself.
That's the next thing I need to do. Now that I've got the earphones, I need these notepads. Yeah.
Just to make notes of what I need to say.
Yeah.
Progress,
yeah.
right? So textbooks give us this story of progress in science.
Yeah.
And it's simply not true. And they tell us the story for a very good reason, but it's a pedagogical reason, so that students understand what science now believes, and which is one of the reasons why textbooks on the history of science are so radically different from textbooks on science, because one wants to teach you about science and the other one wants to teach you about history. I was teaching this to some students in Innsbruck, and so I was telling the story about the ether, and they were horrified, absolutely horrified, and so they went to their lecturer, their relativity lecturer, who they just had this course and they'd just been told this story, and they went to their lecturer and they said, "Did you know this story isn't true?" And they came back to me the following week and they were once again utterly horrified. They said, "We told our lecturer that it wasn't true." I said,
"You shouldn't have done that."
But no, he said, I said, "What did he say?" I said, "He didn't care." He said he knows it's not true, but he doesn't tell the story because it's true. He tells the story because it's helpful.
Yeah.
So some scientists unknowingly repeat these lies of progress, and some scientists knowingly repeat these lies of progress. But if you look, so the progress, if you want to summarise it through the history of physics, within under Newton managed to show that the three-body problem wasn't solvable. Einstein managed to show that the two-body problem wasn't solvable. Quantum mechanics managed to show that the one-body problem wasn't solvable.
Go into each of these different problems if you could.
QCD managed to show that the vacuum isn't solvable.
Oh, God.
And we call this progress.
Oh.
I mean, science doesn't make progress. It
understands something, though.
Okay,
does it not? And then documents it, puts it into the.
Okay, so here I'm gonna slightly draw a nuance to that. Science does make progress, but it makes a very specific kind of progress. So it makes mobile phone shaped progress.
I was going to. What do you mean by that?
I was going to say that.
No, I was going to say. Well, planes are flying,
right?
And we're recording this and broadcasting to.
Yes.
But.
Okay, so we're now on step 2 of the reaching the final goal of saying, I don't know what words mean anymore. Okay, so progress. What do we mean by progress? Because there are two different kinds of progress that science, one that science does make and one that science doesn't make. And we need to draw a distinction between them. And so, I mean, there's Richard Dawkins famously gave this lecture where someone in the Q&A afterwards, someone said, asked this question. He said, well, how can you show that science is true? He said, well, it works.
Yes, that's right.
Planes fly, computers compute.
Yeah.
If you want to, give someone medicine, you give them the medicine that science made. If you want to get them better, if you want to use a phone, use the phone that science made. It works, bitches.
That's the one.
That's the one. It's a brilliant quote. And each of the examples he used is a very specific kind of progress. So I'm gonna draw lots of long words coming out this evening. Here we go. I'm gonna need more tea. Okay, so two distinct words that we have. One.
Shall we do the tea now?
If we can do a break and have another cup of tea, that would be awesome.
I'm not going to edit out anything. I'm just going to go fill up cups quick. Okay, well.
Awesome.
Oh, all right. I will edit this one out. Okay, and yeah, we'll. Okay, we're back.
Okay, wonderful.
You've got your tea. You've got your paper and a pen, and I have already.
Okay, so there's two kinds of ways in which science could make progress. Could, and there's one of these ways in which it does make progress, and there's one of these ways in which it doesn't make progress. So, with respect to what I observe, things that I can actually poke and prod. Science really does make progress, right? If you want to, if you want to get a plane, and I mean in times of less COVID, right? But if you get on a plane in Hong Kong, and someone has calculated, they say, okay, we're going to use this much jet fuel to get you to Berlin, right? Then, they get you to Berlin, and you use the plane that science built, right? You'd be crazy to do anything else. And if you want to get better, then the drugs that biomedicine built are probably a pretty good option. And obviously, I mean, phones are the canonical example, right? I mean, phones are great, and you would never, in all the years of just sort of sitting down and throwing monkey bones in the air, have come up with the transistor, let alone a mobile phone.
Yeah, that's what all the 1920s predictions of the future got wrong, which was the mobile phone and then telecommunications and all that. Right. They all got it wrong. They didn't predict it.
Yes, and all the predictions of 2 years ago, the thing they got wrong was the entire world would shut down.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. How I Met
Oh,
Your
come on, pandemics, they know about this.
Right, okay, I mean, yes, Contagion, that was a documentary. But like How I Met Your Mother, right? He didn't mention it.
I thought you were referring to my real
No,
mother.
not your
No, you
actual
have
mother.
not met my
I've never met your mother. But the TV series How I Met Your Mother, right? He's telling the kids the backstory of like the last however many years, and he never once mentioned that 2020 was a dumpster fire. I mean, why would you not mention that to your kids in reviewing history? Anyway, I don't think How I Met Your Mother is really a true story. Let's get back on topic. Right. So here we go. Phones.
Yeah.
Phones. Here we go.
Science, does it work?
Science.
How does it advance?
Right. So, and I mean, there's XKCD also has got this wonderful cartoon with the background microwave radiation, which again, science, it works, bitches, where you want to predict what the background radiation should be, and it's brilliant, and it's just spot on. Love it.
Yeah.
But so what that is doing, that's all asking the question, what will I see? What science is really, really good at is asking the question, will my detector go ping? Right? If I set up some experiment and I put a detector there, what I want to know is, will it go ping?
Yeah.
And it's really good at that. Or, will my voltmeter say 17 volts? It's really good at that. And so these are called phenomenological results. These are looking at the phenomena that are actually impinging themselves on my senses. So, for example, I build CERN and I want to know whether my detector goes ping. Because at CERN, you never see the Higgs boson at CERN. With apologies to particle physicists, no particle physicist has ever seen the Higgs boson. What they've seen is a detector that goes ping. And we get really very good at predicting what we will see. If I set up my laser, I can set up my laser, and it was a bit waffly before, and I can narrow the line width, and I can get better and better at what my laser, what I will see with my laser. Or I build a quantum computer, and I can, these are phenomenological things. Now there's and all the examples that Dawkins uses are of this type, right? If you want to get a rocket to Mars, right, that's a macroscopic object that you see with your eyes and you fly there. Medicine, a person dies or they don't die. This is a macroscopic thing that we're seeing. Computers compute. You see the result that says the answer is 17, right? These are all macroscopic phenomenological things. And science makes progress on those. We get better at answering the question, what will I see? If you want to positions of the planets, we get really good at saying exactly where Mars is going to be. Right? But if you look for progress in asking what is actually happening, well, then we're very bad at that. We're spectacularly bad at that. So, for example, let's return to ether. So,
just predicting a software project. Like, when is it going to be done? 3 months from now.
When is my computer going to go bing? No. But so if you look at what's actually happening under the hood, so to speak. So let's return to ether. Now, historically, so we said there's this ether, which you have ether vortices. And so gravity is caused by vortices in the ether. And the reason why planets go around in circles is because they're caught in these vortices of ether, which is dense and fluid and going round. And then Newton came along and said, no. There is an ether wind, but it's not a vortex going round. It's streaming from one object to another, and it's rarefied and corpuscular. So the previous answer could tell you roughly where Mars was going to be. And Newton got better at telling you where Mars was going to be. So in that sense, we've made progress on a phenomenological what am I going to see level.
Okay.
Right? But on a underneath the hood, what is the universe doing level, we've gone from ether going around in circles to ether going in straight lines perpendicular to the previous circles. Right? Have we made progress, or have we just completely changed the model? Discuss. Okay, so then you come along and you go, okay, well, relativity tells us actually it's... Einstein would have disagreed because he thought he had an ether theory, but never mind. So relativity says we've got this curved space-time.
Yeah.
Right, and it's not because of ether vortices, and it's not because of an ether wind. It's because we're following these paths on this curved space-time. Yeah. Now, this is not converging. Right, the answer, where will Mars be? That's converging. We're getting really, really good at saying exactly where we think it's going to be, and we can look at the perihelion of Mercury, and we get better at predicting what we're going to see through our telescope. But we're hopping all over the map in terms of what's going on under the hood. And then, particle physicists say, well, we've got gravitons. Hang on, is it gravitons or is it curved space-time? Right? Now, you have these two utterly different theories, which are, they walk side by side, and scientists don't care. I mean, they care a bit, but it doesn't keep them awake at night. Yeah. Some, but most don't, right? That on the one hand you say, okay, gravity is happening because of gravitons and particles, and on the other one it's happening because of curved space-time, right? And we're really good at saying where is Mars going to be, but we have no idea what is going on under the hood. And I picked the example of ether, but this happens across the board. Another example which I find beautiful is if you look at particle-antiparticle pair creation.
Right.
Okay. Before I get there, I'm gonna hop back. I'm gonna take phones. Okay. We'll work up to this from phones.
Write down particle, antiparticle.
Okay.
I should actually have a piece of paper too.
Okay. So we're going to start with phones, right? Yeah. Now, with when you've got a semiconductor, right? So we've got this doped semiconductor, and we've got for those of your viewers who aren't up on their solid state physics and how transistors work, right? So what you've got is in a normal crystal, you've got this lattice of atoms that sit in this nice neat lattice, yeah. And you've got these electrons that flow around. We're all good and happy. And if I put an electric field across this, my electrons flow, mm-hmm. And so I put the electric field across, my electrons flow this way, and that's fine. And I can keep track of where my electrons are, and it's flowing my thing. Now, if I take one of those electrons out, okay, so I have a hole where I'm expecting an electron to be. Now imagine if you've got analogy, if I have a queue of people, right? Yeah. If all of the people go this way, then I have a flow of people going that way. Right? Yeah. But if I take one of the people out, then one person moves along, and the next person moves along, and the next person moves along, and the next person moves along. Right? Now what's actually happened is 20 people have moved one place that way.
Yeah.
But what it looks like is one gap where a person isn't has moved 20 spaces that way. Right? Now, we know that what's really happened is 20 people have each moved one space this way along the queue. But if we look at the maths and we say, the maths is easier to say we have one gap, and the gap has moved that way, because then I have to deal with one thing, not 20 things. So we do this with solid state physics. We say, right, if I take one of these electrons out, so I have this gap, right? Now, if my electron hops into that hole, and this one hops in there, and this one hops in there, this one hops in there, then rather than keeping track of a million electrons going this way, I keep track of a hole going this way. Now, I know that this hole isn't a real thing, right? It's just a gap where the electron isn't. And I'm okay with that. So I say, right, this is what's really going on. What's really going on is the electrons go this way, but I can pretend that the hole is going this way. And I can assign to this hole properties. I can say this hole has an effective mass. Yeah. I can say this hole has an effective charge because I apply an electric field to it and my hole moves that way. Yeah. So I know what the effective charge of my hole is. Even though there's nothing there, it's not a thing. Right, fine. So that's solid state. Now, if you have so Pauli exclusion principle says you can't put two electrons into the same state at once.
Yeah.
Right. Now, and you also say, right, my particles, we're getting into heavy physics here, I'm sorry, I hope
just
okay
you let rip.
Okay.
Let rip.
So if I take a pen and I drop it, right,
Yeah.
it comes to the lowest available energy state.
Why doesn't it go through the table?
We're going to get there in a second.
Okay.
Right, so my pen goes to the lowest energy state.
Right.
Right. So if I have here's 0 energy and I have an excited particle here, right, it will decay down to 0 energy. Right. Now, that's great, except if it equals mc squared, then you've got a positive and a negative root to this, which means that you have, from 0, you've got an infinite amount of energy going up, but you also have an infinite hole going down, as in an infinite, right, there's this is space as well. I can have this negative energy. So that says if my pen starts here and it falls, well, that's not the lowest energy state. The lowest energy state is infinitely far down. And, well, that's a problem, because if I drop my pen from here to here, then when it hits the table, it makes a sound, and that sound gives out the energy that it had from falling. Right. And so that's fine. It has this much energy, and it gives out that much energy, and that's fine. But if it then falls from here down an infinitely deep hole, it emits an infinite amount of energy while it's falling.
Yeah.
Right. Now, so that says, basically, if I have one electron in the universe, and that electron tries to find its lowest possible state, it will fall into this infinite negative state, emit an infinite amount of energy. So one electron has sufficient energy to blow up the entire universe. And if we're ready to do some experimental physics, because I said I was an experimentalist, okay, here's what we do. Quick experiment coming up. This pen contains at least one electron. We're going to observe this pen for a whole second and see if it destroys the universe.
No.
Right. So we've managed to experimentally show that this theory is not quite right. This you never knew you were going to do experimental physics this evening, did you?
Fascinating.
Absolutely. So we can show there's something wrong here. So now here's what Pauli did. So he said, well, let's just imagine that all of these states are full. They're full of electrons.
Yeah.
Right. Well, how many states are there? Well, it's an infinitely deep hole that I fill with an infinite number of electrons. Okay. So I have an infinite number of electrons. But of course, the vacuum. So the vacuum consists of an infinite number of electrons filling this infinitely deep hole. As well, that then means that we've got this. Why isn't the vacuum infinitely charged? It says, well, there's this background charge that cancels it out, which has an infinite charge density. Okay, so we have the background universe has an infinite charge density, which is cancelled out by an infinite number of electrons filling an infinitely deep hole, which is the only thing that stops my pen from destroying the universe. Now, it starts to sound like a bit of a cuckoo theory, but here we go. So, but it's not crazy science because it leads to a prediction. Now, go back to my phone. If I have my material, and I excite an electron from here to here, then I go from this material that has nothing interesting going on to I've got an electron here and I've got a hole here, and I can make my electron move this way and I can make my hole move this way, right? And if I have a hole and an electron here, they can combine to be neutral. So I said, okay, well, the same could happen, right? If I've got, here's my vacuum, and it's got all these electrons here, I could excite an electron out of this vacuum up into real space, and then I have an electron here, which just appeared apparently out of nothing, and a hole here. So I've got electron hole creation, just like you have in a semiconductor.
Yeah.
Excite an electron, I've got a hole here. So he made this prediction. He says, you can fire a photon into the vacuum, and you can create an electron and a hole.
And it actually happened.
In this infinitely deep Fermi sea.
Yeah.
And they did that, and it actually happened. Now, this looks like experimental proof of infinitely many electrons in an infinitely deep hole with an infinitely dense charge
No, but it's describing
background.
something else, isn't it?
Okay, so now.
Okay.
So what he's managed to do is he's managed to say, I know when my detector will go ping. Right, he's made a prediction, and what he is able to do is he can say, my detector went ping. Good. Now we've made progress. But now we have the question, what's actually going on? Because the idea of an infinitely deep sea of infinitely many electrons is uncomfortable.
That sounds
We don't
totally
want-
poppycock.
Right. So here's what he did. He said, I'm going to do a mathematical transformation. I'm going to take the entire theory. I'm going to take all of the maths, and I'm just going to do a transform so that it's the same basic idea. It just looks different in the maths.
Okay.
But it's formally identical. So what you have is and because the maths is identical, you say, okay, well, if this maths is correct, then anything which this theory predicts, this theory will also predict. We might interpret it differently, but they will always give exactly the same answer to the question, will my detector go ping? Because they're mathematically identical. So he did this transform, and he said, right, it's not that we've got an infinite deep sea of electrons and we excite an electron, we have now a hole. This electron, I've now created an electron, not excited a pre-existing electron. And this hole, I'm going to call that a positron. It's an anti-electron.
Okay.
Right? So matter-antimatter pair creation is mathematically identical to
This infinite.
an infinitely deep Fermi sea.
Right.
Now, between writing his original paper and picking up his Nobel Prize, he rewrote the maths.
Okay.
And in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he says, now for those of you who are really uncomfortable with this idea that we can just create matter out of nothing, it's okay. Just imagine it's like an infinitely deep Fermi sea of all the electrons. So he himself in his Nobel Prize speech said, it's just the same as this. Mathematically, they're the same thing. So we've made progress in will my detector go ping? We've made a prediction. But we have no idea if the universe is really matter-antimatter or
This Fermi sea.
an infinitely deep sea of Fermi electrons. Now, just to completely go off on one, just to show how disconcerting this can get. Okay, sign change. There is a question which puzzles physicists, which is to say, where is the antimatter? Why is the universe mainly made of matter, not antimatter? Fair question. And there are theories, but it's not yet clear. Now, let's imagine for just a second, because we can, because the maths of a universe that is able to produce antimatter is the same as the maths of a universe that has this infinitely deep antimatter sea. Right? Now, I am made of electrons and protons and neutrons and normal matter. Now,
Define normal matter.
not holes in this
Okay,
negative
right,
energy sea.
okay.
Right. Okay. So I'm made of, I don't know if my hand here, if any of these waves are on the camera.
Yeah, go up, stop.
Okay, there you go. So
yeah,
now I know how high I can wave.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm made of electrons and protons and neutrons and normal matter. And what would happen if instead of saying, actually, we've got normal matter, and then antimatter is just a hole in this Fermi sea, what would happen if actually what we call antimatter is the real stuff, and what we call normal matter is a hole in an antimatter Fermi sea?
Oh, I see.
Right? Which means everything that I think I am made of is not real matter, but it's a hole in an antimatter sea. And the answer is, mathematically, the two theories will be identical. It's just a sign change. And we have no way of working out the difference between those two theories, because both theories, because it's just a sign change, they would make identical predictions. So we make progress with respect to the question, will my detector go ping? We don't get close to making progress with respect to answering the questions, what is the universe actually doing?
Are we at the point now where what is words?
Are we getting close? You tell me. So this much is to say, science makes progress in as much as, yes, planes fly.
Yeah.
But you cannot extend that to say, therefore, science is really getting at these deep fundamental truths of the universe. We're getting really good at telling ourselves stories that make things make sense.
Yeah.
But telling ourselves stories that we can get a handle on and make things make sense is a very long way away from saying we're making progress in grasping what the universe is doing. So, going back to your original question of, was that a rough hash theory and now we're at a more refined theory, I'm like, that has implicit in it the notion that we are making progress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not clear to me that we are. So I'll give a just one more example as to ways in which we're not making progress, coming way back to the question that you had earlier, that we or the comment that you made earlier.
Which was that?
Which was that people jump off buildings.
Oh, right.
Which is to say, capitalism is very good at doing certain things. If you want more money to be flowing around the world, then capitalism is very good at that.
Well, I had a discussion in the previous endeavour I had was with Professor Ming Chu. He introduced me to a very interesting insight, and I think I'll bring it up now, whereby capitalism essentially allocates capital to effective people, and as a result, power is aggregated to a very small minority.
Mm-hmm.
But with this increased power, one needs to have the equivalent of a democracy or some similar sort of system, which would then mitigate the power of these individuals. It's actually a separate point that I'm just sort of elaborating on that. Keep going. What's your point on capitalism?
So capitalism is great at if you want stuff and you want it now, capitalism has allowed Jeff Bezos to become incredibly rich, and that
he's effective at what he does.
It's effective at that, and that has allowed me to be able to order next day delivery on Amazon Prime.
Oh.
Now, is that progress? Well, that's another question.
Yeah, it is.
Right. So, So I was a wonderful quote from a colleague. We were having discussions about, this is many years ago now, before Amazon was the behemoth that it is now.
Yeah.
But we were talking about whether or not we bought Christmas presents for people on Amazon in the early days of Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And some people said, no, I think you should go to the shop and pick it out, because that's part of the giving of Christmas is actually the thought of going to the shop and selecting, and with Christmas you have the relationship there that you're building, and the gift giving is not simply an act. It's thinking of the person and spending time on the person.
Mm-hmm.
And by just simplifying it and clicking it and saying I'll take that one, you remove something of the humanity from the gift giving. So said first person, I don't shop on Amazon. Said second person, I absolutely shop on Amazon for Christmas, because then just with a single click they'll even wrap it for you, send it to the person, and you don't even have to talk to them. Now, by a certain measure of progress, we have made progress. By another measure of progress, like are we hanging on to our humanity?
Oh.
We have arguably not progressed. And so there are certain things that science does and technology does, and this technological society does, where by some measures we are making progress, and by other measures we are not making progress, and by other measures we are making marked regress. And one of the big problems that I think exists is we don't even notice what we've lost. I was talking to someone at Hong Kong U, a lecturer at Hong Kong U. I mean, top university, pushing forward education, and they were a local, so they aren't used to the fact that there are other places in the world where 11-year-old kids don't jump off buildings. And I commented, I said, this is a problem. The education system has a problem. This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, this is...
And their response was...
just the way it is.
If you're going to have an education system, you've got to push kids hard. It's just the price you pay for a good education system. And, with the ability, permanent access to information, you can check your grades on your phone whenever you want. Lying in bed in the morning, you can wake up, the first thing you can do is check, because your thing come back right. Always on, right? by some measures this is progress, but by others it is not. And often, because we're told that technological progress is the progress that we want, the progress that we make blinds us to what we've lost. Which is a very long way of getting back to saying your assumption of progress through history, I would problematize.
Contest.
Yes.
I see. Doing away with that sort of progress means, well, might not mean, but introduces a world whereby I now have to humanly deal with my child having polio, or you understand what I'm getting at.
Yes.
So then, how does, I mean, in entire sections of strife and struggle have been removed as a result of this very niche, sort of narrow scientific progress, and new forms of communication have opened up, which allow us to, for example, the young daughter, the 13-year-old daughter who would be a creative individual now has an iPhone, and over a period of time, through Snapchat, etc., this kid is now spending umpteen hours a day interacting with her friends and whatnot on these apps which are psychologically designed to be equivalent to crack cocaine.
Right.
And now you introduce new forms of strife and struggle, which are designed specifically at the weaknesses of the individuals at different stages of life. Does this not necessarily refer to the advances of science or technology, but instead stuff like greed? Can we not start talking about that? Is this not, now we can start to introduce the concepts of Buddhism and attachment to things, greed, anger, envy, benevolence, righteousness, wisdom? Have we forgotten about these sorts of things? How do we introduce them back into our society?
Right. So now, right at the beginning, where I said, you have these arguments that say, with science, all questions of ought and should and morality and the character of a person had been bracketed out.
Right.
And now, by looking at technological quote unquote progress,
right,
we suddenly find these questions are urgently pressed on us.
Right.
So now we find out that when we're looking at science, technology, phones, it is an existential need to start discussing these questions, which previously we'd said that's religion and has nothing to do with science.
Right.
So I'm glad we've got here, because this now gets to saying, this is kind of the research I'm looking at to say,
right,
it is a really important question. It's a worldwide, but for Hong Kong also, it is an existentially important question.
Mm-hmm.
You raised a couple of points, and I'll try and tick through them, and I've made a note of some of them with my wonderful pen and paper which you provided, and we'll see if I remember all of them. But here we go. So the first question is with respect to polio. That's an important question, and it's not to be lightly tossed aside, because yes, there are things where particularly medical technology has brought things which would be very hard to say this is not beneficial.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to give a couple of answers connected to this question of polio to try and get a handle on that and how we should approach that question.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to turn around and say we should all be anti-vaxxers. I'm not. No. Go get your kids vaccinated.
Yes, go.
So I'm not going to be an anti-vaxxer, but to say vaccines are good and we should get people vaccinated is not to then say we should uncritically accept the entire medical industrial complex and all that goes with that. They're two different questions. So, first thing to note is that technology is not, as you kind of brought up yourself, technology is not the one-way street.
The be-all and end-all?
No, the one-way street of medical progress that is sometimes presented. So, for example, if we had not, the world is a global village, right? You can get from one side of the world to the other in 12 hours, 14 hours. Hang on, one side, no, 24 hours. I keep on remembering that Hong Kong and Europe are on the other side of the world. Okay, you can get from one side of the world to the other in 24 hours. And you couldn't do that a few short decades ago, which would have meant that if, let's say, 100 years ago, someone had eaten uncooked bat, Europe would never have known about it.
Right.
So, while the advances of modern technology mean that your son will not suffer from polio, the advances of modern technology might mean that your son will suffer from COVID. So we can't simply say modern technology cured polio, therefore modern technology is good, because technology giveth and technology taketh away. So there, it is this double-edged sword. So the next question then to look at is to say, okay, technology is, and you say design, it's designed to hook us. It's designed to be crack cocaine. Sometimes when I have these conversations, sometimes people say, well, your phone it's just a thing. A thing is neutral, right? It's not good or bad. It's just how you use it. If you use it by staring at it for 20 hours a day, you're using it wrong, right? And this is to misunderstand that someone sat and was paid a lot of money to design it in a way that hooks you in. Your phone wants your eyeballs. If your phone, every minute that you're not looking at your phone is a minute that your phone has failed. And for that reason,
or the designers of those applications that wrote the app,
right,
on the phone, not specifically the phone. Because now you make it sound like it's an inert object that's...
Okay, that's a whole other discussion which we don't need to get into right now. But yeah, so the designers have failed. And let me say, okay, so I'm not going to let the phone off the hook completely.
Fine.
In as much as saying a designer who wants to just get you to abandon all relationships just so you sit on your own in the corner, right? That designer has very little power over you until he has a phone, right?
Right.
Once he puts,
sure,
right, it's not that
like
the phone
drug,
is
right.
It's not that the phone is an uninvolved bystander in this. The situation that doesn't have the phone, where you've got a megalomaniacal designer and a human being, right? Nothing interesting happens. The human being goes about their life, right? It's the phone, it's the physical object that person can put into your hand, which provides the conduit for their advertising clause. So I'm not going to let the phone off completely, because then we get this sort of disembodied world where it's it's between us and Mark Zuckerberg, but it's not. Yeah. Right? The physical technology which embodies the values that have been designed into it. Mm-hmm. Right? If Mark Zuckerberg died, right, Facebook would still be there harvesting your data. Yeah. Right? It takes on this existence beyond the designers. So yes. So I'm not going to let the phone off completely.
Fine, fair.
Right. But however you choose to frame it, the phone has been designed to hook you.
Yes.
And technologies come with their own values. They come with their own value system. So, for example, technology it likes making things efficient. It likes standardizing things, right? If I'm going to hand carve you 4 chairs, all of those chairs are going to be different, right? Technology comes along and says, hang on, we can make this faster. I can make chairs faster than you by having a big machine that just churns out chairs, but all of the chairs are going to be the same. So technology, once it has speed, it speeds things up, but it also then standardizes things. And so when someone comes in to say, I want a different phone, you go, I'm sorry, you can't have a different phone. You can have this phone or that phone. Right? You can't suit it to your own personal desires. I mean, okay, to some phones you can, but they are not individual items. When you want a car, if you go and build your own car, it takes you forever. It's inefficient. It's ineffective. You just go out, you buy yourself a car, you take it off the peg, and it's the standard one. So technology has this sort of standardization, efficiency, speed, all of these things, these values get rolled into it. And all of these things are inhumane values. So, for example, if I'm having an argument with my wife and I'm thinking, okay, what is the fastest way to finish this argument? I know at least one reason why I need to be having an argument with my wife, or why my wife needs to be arguing with me, namely that I'm trying to get out this argument as quickly as possible. Right? I'm not. You don't have an argument to efficiently get her to be quiet and go away, right?
Well, many men might disagree.
Right, and that's why many men have relationship problems.
Yeah.
Podcast 2. Dr. Mike answers your relationship questions. So here we go. So you have this thing where, efficiency is as soon as, when I'm trying to raise my kids, right? I go out and I hike up a mountain with them and I spend time with them. I'm not asking the question, okay, my kids need to know they're loved. What's the most efficient way to convey that? Right?
I love you. And then that's it.
Quite. If I can do it in 3 minutes, 3 seconds, I don't know why I bothered to take
Good
an
job.
entire afternoon to go out and help you fix your bike. Right? So relational things are not efficient.
Yeah.
Right? Relational things are not standardized.
Yeah.
I go, I say to my son, let's whatever, go and fix a bike together. And I say to my daughter, let's go and fix a bike together, and she doesn't feel loved. I'm like, well, I don't see why not. There's something wrong with you. Yoshi got it completely. Right? So people aren't standardized. But if you want to use technology, you better be standardized. If you're left-handed, well, I'm sorry. It's inefficient to stop our production line just to make left-handed things. You better get with a program and learn to use your right hand. Right? So the notion of individual human beings clashes with the value of technology. And in a technological society, we don't say, well, okay, let's be inefficient. Let's stop the production line and make 20% of the scissors we make left-handed scissors. Let's make them for people with small hands. Right? We don't form the machines to fit the people. We form the people Procrustean style to fit the machines.
No, we form the machines to fit the majority of people. And then the leftovers. I mean, well, why not just have scissors with, designed for toes, for example? It won't be that way.
Okay, so yes and no. So for scissors, we design the machines to fit the majority of the people.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's take. So this is step one of the argument, and then let's take the argument a step further. Let's look at. We touched on education earlier. Let's look at education. So.
Oh well, yeah.
Okay, can of worms. But here we go. Right now, if this person is going to go and be an artist, and this person's going to go and be a car mechanic, and this person's going to go and be a physicist, and this person's going to go and be a chef, and this person's going to go out and live on a farm and hug trees and eat berries, right? Now, and this person's going to be a politician, and this person's going to get sent to a gulag in mainland China. So now clearly each of them has a very different need from the educational system. But you say, well, okay, by a the mentality of the machine is standardization, comparison, being effective. You say, well, how do I know it's effective if I can't compare it? How can I compare it if it's not standardized? So now I say, well, it's all very well saying you want to be a farmer and you want to be a chef and you want to do whatever, but I need to set you a standardized exam. And I don't set the exam that is applicable to the majority, because there is no majority of people who are going to do the same job. Right? There's 100 jobs out there, which means that not more than 2% of the people are going to be doing any given job. Right? What fraction of the population needs to learn calculus? Right? We do not optimize calculus exams to teach the majority of the kids the stuff they're going to know. Right?
Yeah, but those calculus exams are optimized to find individuals who can help us to make this narrow sort of advancement within science, which puts things like mobile phones in our hands, which gives us airplanes, which have significant, well, you could say, improvements on speed throughout of our movement, for example.
I would love to think that calculus exams are designed for that purpose.
All right.
I have kids in the Hong Kong school system, and I think that is not what the designers of exams had in mind.
Okay.
We're gonna bring it back to the main argument is to say that you have this sort of logic, this slow grinding logic of technology, which is optimized to the values of technology, not optimized to the values of people. And
so this is where like a god starts to. This no longer this idea of a god, and now it becomes like this real thing that imposes a reality, its own sort of like desires upon us, kind of thing. Right. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. So you have, and I wouldn't. Well, actually,
not even a god.
No. Okay. So there's a guy called Neil Postman who's an educationalist who actually refers to these things as gods.
Oh, interesting.
Small g. But yes, so yes, it's like that. So you have this system, and you say, well, look at standardization, for example.
Neil Gaiman should be listening to this podcast.
Send him a link. So when I teach students something, I teach it to them in 50 minutes. Is that because miraculously every idea I wish to convey can be conveyed in 50 minutes? No. Is that because the kid's attention span happens to be exactly 50 minutes long? No, good deal shorter. Why? It's because if you chunk up your day into 50 minutes, you can efficiently move your kids from lecture to lecture. You can efficiently assign rooms. Right? So, when the kids come into the lecture theatre, they sit in the same lecture theatre every week. Right? If I want to go out and I want to show them a tree, I can't, because I can't traipse 120 kids out to go and look at a tree. Right? So I am forced to be efficient, to get the kids to sit in rows, to do the thing at the time the timetable says, for the duration the timetable says. And if I say I can communicate to you everything I need to say in 20 minutes, right? So I give a 20-minute lecture and I say, right, you can leave now. I mean, half the students will be very happy, and the other half would feel shortchanged. They're like, but you're supposed to teach us for an hour. Right? It's like, surely if I've taught you the thing that you need to know, and I can do that in 20 minutes, that's fine. But the university would say, Dr. Brownnutt, we believe you've been skimping on your lectures. It's like, if I'm a better teacher than everyone else and I can teach it to them faster, but no, it's the by the clock. It's the standardization that a lecture is something that lasts 50 minutes. So here we have this set of values which technology comes with now, and most of them are inhumane. Most of them are not designed for people. So the next fun thing to say, what do we then do with our phone, given our phone is trying to take over us, and given we don't necessarily want to become anti-vaxxers and let our kids die of polio? Here's the question. Can we live in a technological world where we are surrounded by technological systems and live with those systems while not accepting or living by their values? And I think the answer is yes.
Why do you say that?
Because if the answer is no, then life becomes tremendously hopeless, and I would just go and become an alcoholic. Or live on a desert island and watch my kids die of polio. So here's a suggestion for a shape for an answer. When relationships tend, if you sort of list all the sort of technological machine values that I was thinking of earlier, with it should be efficient, it should be standardized, it should be most effective, it should be optimized, so on and so forth. You should have metrics for it, it should be measurable, it should be blah blah blah. And then to say, okay, these are machine values, they are, broadly speaking, inhumane values, and the nice thing is a lot of the humane values are in fact the opposite of those. For example, technology likes to make things, by its standard, convenient. Right? Your phone is there, and your boss can get hold of you whenever she wants. Well, it's convenient for her, it's inconvenient for me, but never mind. But we sell it as convenient. So, to say, well, can we revel in the inconvenience of the world? My kids need to know, and this is really, really important, my kids need to know that parenting them and looking after them is inconvenient. Right? No one has kids because they think, you know what, that's going to be a convenient thing to do. That's going to make my life easier. Right? And kids wander around. They're concerned that they're going to inconvenience someone because they've bought this lie that technological values apply to people.
Yeah.
Right? You don't buy a phone where all the buttons are in a really awkward place. Right? You don't strap your watch to your leg just so you have to roll up your trouser leg to look at the time. You put it on your wrist because that's convenient.
Yeah.
So these are technological things.
Yeah.
And we assume that because technology is so wonderful, these values also apply to people, and they don't. And so we can say, okay, I can use technology. Take a bike, for example. But I can subvert that technology to human ends. So, for example, when my bike breaks, the convenient thing to do is to take it to the shop and fix it. It takes 20 minutes to go to the shop, 20 minutes for them to fix it, 20 minutes to come home again. Jobs are good. It's convenient, it's fast, it's efficient, it's effective. Now, if I say, right, my bike is broken, I'll fix it. That's inconvenient. I'll teach my son to fix it. So, we spend 20 minutes.
Even more inconvenient.
Even more. It is. My hat, it would take me,
But that's what my dad used to do with us.
Right. It takes me 5 minutes to change a tyre on my own, or 25 minutes to change it with my son.
Yeah.
And
for example, I crashed the car once. And my father made sure that I paid for every body part. We freaking repaired that car ourselves. Put it up on jacks. We made makeshift things to realign the metal and do all of that stuff myself. Believe me, after that, I was like, okay, let's drive this car better,
Right. And so you've got a double benefit or triple benefit. One is you've learned to drive the car carefully.
Yeah.
Right. One is you've learned to repair a car, and the other is you've got you've managed to spend quality time with your dad.
Well,
right.
I don't think it was that quality at that time.
Okay, fair enough.
He was pissed.
Okay.
But the lesson was learnt.
Right.
And I'll never forget that.
Right.
Yeah.
So fixing a bike, it takes me 20 minutes to go to the shop with my son to buy the tool.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we have to go online to get the videos,
Sure.
and I know how to repair it, but we watch the YouTube video, so he knows how to repair it.
Yeah.
And work out what tools we need. Then we go to the shop, we buy the tools, we come back, we find it's the wrong size tools, we go to the shop and pick out the right one, and we come back, and then we spend the Saturday afternoon fixing it, and so on and so forth. Right? This is inefficient. This is broadly speaking ineffective. It's inconvenient, and it's a wonderfully human thing to do. And so it's using technology. You know, I'm not saying you should do everything by hand. You can't use a socket set. I'm not saying you can't use a bike. Bike use technology, right? But to say, let us use technology in a way that fits humane values. Let us be creatively negligent of convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Let us deliberately do things the hard way. I mean,
So,
for
Mike,
example,
then at what point, when, for example, these software systems start to reason and be able to start doing sort of like, you know, thinking themselves and decision making themselves, and then they come across these blundering human monkeys that are busy doing their human things, and then, you know, they're like, okay, my God is efficiency, and it's obliterate these things.
right.
How are you going to coexist with that?
I think understanding that this is, as it stands, a hypothetical situation, but
Yeah.
not as hypothetical as would be comfortable. So I was watching Terminator the other day, the latest one, and I was having this discussion with a friend, and if you look at a lot of the movies
Yeah.
that address this problem, I think they get it wrong. So if you Day After Tomorrow, right? How do we beat these machines that are, you know, ruthlessly effective at killing? Well, we build these weapons that are ruthlessly effective, right? How do we beat something that can fire 1,000 rounds at us? Well, we develop a gun that can fire 1,001 rounds. You know, how do we cope in a world where, you know, machines can build things faster than we can and build things cheaper than we can?
Yeah.
Well, we work out how to build weapons to destroy them faster and cheaper. And so in each of these sort of science fiction scenarios, we beat the machines by adopting machine values.
Uh-huh.
We say we need to be effective, we need to be cheaper, faster. Now, the problem is, I would argue, and this is slightly hypothetical, but I would argue that in a fight against machines, we can never beat machines on their ground. Right? They will always be more effective than we are. But if we sit and we say, right, we're going to do things the inconvenient way, then we're fighting on our ground. So, I mean, I'll give you an example of potentially coming back to the polio example. I was a couple of years ago. My grandma was unwell, very unwell. She was old, so it wasn't surprising that she was unwell. And if I'd have wanted her to live as long as possible, I could have sent money across to get her put into a very good care home, and she would have had the best equipment, the best drugs, and the best care, and so on and so forth. And that would have been effective. I can set some measurable target goal that, you know, she should live as long as possible. It's measurable, it's quantifiable. We've got this metric, and I can do it effectively, and I can do it efficiently, and I can do it cost efficiently. Right? This is everything that machine wants. But on the other hand, what I actually did was I got on a plane from Hong Kong to the UK, and for 4 days, back in the day when you could get on planes and fly somewhere for 4 days, you know, and because I had to work, I couldn't take lots of time off work, but I went across just to visit her. And if you evaluate that by any sensible metric, right, the money that I spent on a plane ride could have been better spent on medication. The time that I, 4 days, is it worth it? You know, how do I change the world by spending 4 days with her? And yet, it was a fantastically human thing to do. It you know, we spend so much time trying to think of ways to make us think. We're looking for things that make us money, and so little time looking for things that make us human. And I tell you, I mean, she every single person that she saw for the rest of her life, you know, she told my grandson came from Hong Kong for 4 days to visit me, and she felt special, and it's by all the measurable metrics that you would care, it's a deeply ineffective, inefficient, impractical thing to do. But it's human. And so I would suggest that when the machines come for us, we can't fight them on machine territory, because machines will always be better machines than we are. But we can fight them on humane territory, because we will always be better humans than them.
Well, I'm listening to the Gulag Archipelago at the moment, the audiobook. And, yeah, I don't see or hear much good humane values that come across in that scenario. I mean, there are plenty of suffering that goes on underneath this regime, but, yeah, to me the civilization, or this humane thing that you discuss, is just a very thin layer above this animalistic sort of tyrant of an animal that can arise within us. So, yeah, when we come to an example of we say this is a hypothetical scenario of against being pitted against the machines, it's already happening now, in the sense that the internet is owned by these companies like Google, etc. They've mobilized this massive advertising artificial intelligence entity, which is very clued up on the pitfalls and the weaknesses of humans, and those things, those humanly things, are the very things that this AI system is exploiting. And that's the reason why you get your teenage daughter sitting in the corner, looking at the phone, being a copperhead of the a copperhead refers to a battery cell, a copperhead powering this matrix kind of entity, which is fueled on tension of human beings. The thing is that how do you compete with that? How do you compete with that? Is it because of our financial system and of the quantitative easing, the funny money that we've been using for so long, that, you know, reduces the quality of everything around us, such that we are unable to persist the fruits of our labor into the future, because everything is being devalued. So there's no point in saving. It just becomes a very consumption-oriented sort of society.
So again, I would say, take an example. I mean, consumption is a wonderful example. That, you know, that there is a brutal logic to consumption, and it was a deliberate logic to try and get the world to recover after the war, and people sat down and said, okay, well, we can't just sell people the stuff at the rate they need it. We have to have them consume it. They have to take it in, chew it up, and spit
not
it
one
out
car
and
in the
take in
garage,
more.
but two.
Right, and not one car that they then fix, but two that they replace every couple of years. And you know, the logic of technology, which I was discussing earlier, is very, very, very closely aligned to the logic of consumerism. It's very closely aligned to the logic of capitalism, modern economics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at with the notion of things have to be measurable, they have to be improved, they have to accelerate in their improvement.
This is that scientific, that narrow niche scientific.
This is this sort of these technological values, right? So you say, it's not good enough that our kids are getting smarter. It's not good enough that our kids learn what they need. Our kids have to be smarter than last year's kids. Yeah. And it's not good enough that they're smarter than last year's kids. They need to be increasingly smarter than last year's kids over the kids year before, right? So we've got to have not just good enough, but improvement, and not just improvement, but accelerating improvement. And right. Moore's law is great for transistors, and it's terrible for human beings. But we apply Moore's law to human beings.
And do you think this is the reason why societies are becoming more and more closed and careful, like the Canadians? I mean, it's almost like they're moving towards this Asian-style government where everything's so protected, everything's so because now this other parts of the humanity or human systems are under this huge constant expectation of improving, speeding up, that it's almost like you're driving so fast that it's like, oh, shit, I don't know if I can stay on this road.
Right. So
government put up these guardrails.
Details, right? Without getting into the details of particular
jurisdictions or areas,
national geopolitics. But yes, you have this problem where because everyone is saying we have to go faster, we have to get more. And so you see it in education, but obviously you see it in economics as well, where GDP is a very modern notion. It's a very recent notion, and the notion that our GDP should be growing is an incredibly modern notion, and the notion that our GDP should grow without end is an insane notion. And so this machine technological logic and consumption and modern economics are all very tightly interbound. And so I would argue then that to say that the things I said earlier about subverting machine mentalities can be carried across to subverting consumeristic mentalities and also subverting economic mentalities. So, for example, the great thing is you can buy clothes and you can buy more clothes and you can buy cheaper clothes and so on and so forth. You can also fix your clothes, right? Needle and thread, it's dirt cheap. It's much cheaper, it doesn't matter what your hourly rate is. If you work in McDonald's, it's still cheaper to buy a new pair of trousers than to fix your old pair of trousers, right? It's always cheaper to, given modern fast fashion, right? The way the fashion industry works is always cheaper to replace rather than fix. It's always faster to replace rather than fix. It's always more convenient to replace rather than fix. And yet, it's that much more humane to actually sit down with a needle and thread. And I have trousers that I sit and I sew up and I patch and I darn. In fact, I can point to the various holes on these trousers that I've fixed, and I can tell. I have the history of my evenings written in these trousers. I can tell you where I was when each darn was made, and I can look at these trousers and they contain memories of the last few years.
My wife conspires to throw my holy clothes away.
But you have, in doing that, you then, and this is going to sound very weird, but here you build a relationship with the garment. Yeah. It becomes, a pair of black trousers, you take them off the peg, they're just black trousers, right? And so you have this machine mentality of standardization, uniform, interchangeability. Whereas once it becomes a pair that you've fixed, it actually becomes not the same as every other pair of trousers. No. Just as the bike that I've spent, weekends fixing with my son, I might be able to throw it away and buy a better one, but I wouldn't be buying. It would be a different bike. They're not interchangeable, and so with consumerism, again the same logic, the same arguments of subverting this machine mentality, I think holds there as well. And so coming back to the daughter sitting in the corner being a copperhead, I think again similar arguments hold. So for example, there's a principle which I apply with online interactions back and forth, which has become rather difficult during COVID, but which I stick by, is to say, because you can have flame wars on Facebook, right?
Sure.
You write something, they write something back, and it just goes back and forth, and you don't converge, right? Because
Diverge.
Facebook was not designed for humans to have a sensible conversation, right? Twitter
Yeah.
was certainly not designed for humans to have a sensible conversation, right? You can't, here, for 3 hours we can sit and then we can pick up this idea and go back to that one, and how about this one? I can take notes and we can drink more tea and so on. Right? This is a human interaction.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if I had to fit my answers into 140 characters, this wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Goes without saying. So what I do is I say, okay, sometimes there's a question where you can go back and forth a couple of times and it converges, and that's really great. If someone says, how about this, and I say, well, that, and they go, converge, we've got an answer, good. And I say, okay, here's the deal. I will allow this conversation to go back and forth 3 times. You, me, you, me, you, me. Right. If it's not converging after 3 times, I will stop that conversation.
Right.
And I will not pick it up again until I have physically sat across a table from you and discussed it over a cup of tea.
Interesting.
And I have people where a conversation has gone back and forth, and I've just stopped for 18 months.
Uh-huh.
And then, I'll be in Wales and I'm like, I need to go and visit this person. Because I can't, we've got this conversation burning in the background and I need, so yes, it's 45 minutes out of my, I'm driving down the M4, it's 45 minutes out of my way, but I'll go and visit them. And I'll text them, I'll say, we need to talk because there was this conversation we had a year and a half ago. Like, you're still
freaking hell.
It's like, but I need to sit and drink tea with you. Right? It's not a fast way to have conversations. It is not efficient, but it is deeply humane.
This is another reason, one of the primary reasons for this is I hope those copperheads watch this kind of thing. And it's like, oh my God, this is not just like some sort of like it's deliberately 3 hours.
Right.
People listen, 3 hours? God, what are you doing?
How can a conversation carry on for 3 hours?
Yes, exactly.
There are that many things in the world to discuss. We've done American politics, Brexit, COVID. We're done.
The talking points, exactly. And then the AI system is busy sitting there in the background trying to conspire. How can I create as much controversy as possible to drive these little attention, these copperheads to go feed me some more.
Right, but what I don't want to do, I don't want to look and say, that the past was so much better. The past was certainly different.
Yeah.
In the same way as I said, with science doesn't make progress. I think science doesn't make regress. It just is different.
Yeah.
But if you look historically, you'd sit in the pub for 3 hours of an evening.
Yeah, and you'll go home and your wife complains.
Yes, but you sit in the pub for 3 hours and you could have a conversation, and people knew how to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think this is the lost art of conversation. And now I just sound old. I'm sorry, but to get,
no, you don't.
Good.
But this is exactly the point that needs to be. Sorry to interrupt you. It's almost like we're the tradition and the modern thing. As soon as you start to forget the tradition, and you get you're going to get the old that stick with the tradition and they don't see the advance in the future, and then you get groups of people that just want to do the modern stuff but then forget about the tradition. This is when like catastrophe starts to think. So the old needs to continue rejuvenate its understanding, and then the new needs to continually go back and say, why was it done in the old way?
Right.
So this is kind of like a...
And so this is something where technology becomes tremendously destructive.
Right, exactly.
In as much as, if you go back 150 years, the language spoken by someone 150 years ago and someone spoken 120 years ago is more or less the same, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to know something, you could go to your grandma and you could ask her. And your grandma understood the world in which you lived.
Yeah.
Right? Because the toys you play with are more or less the same as the toys your grandma plays with.
Sure.
And the tools that your dad needs to use at work are much the same as the tools that his dad needed to use. And so you have this intergenerational back and forth discussion where the young are in contact with the thoughts of the old. And they get to see that wisdom, they get to see that experience, they get to see that cynicism, they get to, something to take the edge off their idealism maybe, but also the old people get a bit of encouragement to maybe hold on to their idealism. Right? But you have this interaction back and forth. Now,
It's like ships passing in the night.
Right, things change so fast. I say to my students, I remember when I got my first Facebook account. I was doing my PhD and needed something to take my mind off the pain. But now, I say to the students, okay, for the course, can we post this on Facebook? You guys use Facebook, right?
Nah.
To talk to my mum, right? So, I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh, this is whatever program. And I said, what's that? They said, it's like this. I said, well, what's that? They said, it's like this. They had to go back 4 generations of programs back before. I know that one. I've heard of that. Right. So you have this problem that things change so fast that between one generation and the next, there is no point of contact. And because young people then think there is nothing that they either can or need to talk to old people about, and that by young people I mean people in their 20s, and by old people I mean people my age, 15, 20 years older, right? They assume, okay, there's nothing here that needs to be said, and so we live in this ahistoric thing where it's now, and there's no contact with a wider perspective. And the speed with which technology advances, the speed with which technology changes, plays into that generational dislocation. So, without wanting to get too depressed, let's see if I can sort of say something hopeful on that. So I was chatting to a colleague yesterday, who is older, who is not from my generation, but more experienced in the world, and we were having a similar discussion to this one, and so she was looking at. So she's in Hong Kong, teaches on the mainland, but cannot go to the mainland for reasons of pandemics. And so she's teaching these younger university students, and she said, how can I adjust to reach the younger kids where they're at? And so we discussed that for a bit, and then I said, but also there's you bring an experience and a life perspective which would benefit them as well.
Absolutely.
So, for example, technology is all about immediacy. Technology is about now, right? If I go online, I want to look at a YouTube video. If I can't find it on the first, 4 in the list of the things, right? It's like, oh, it's probably gone somewhere, right? If I look for a paper, right, I'm not going to walk to the library to get it. I just Googled, done, fine, right? So I expect it immediately. I expect it now. I expect my phone updates to come now. When an email comes, it goes ping, and I check it. So these technological values, they prime me for immediacy, and it's a deeply inhumane value. Whereas to say, I am older, I am physically unable to respond to things as fast as you guys. It takes me a while to reach across and press send, right? But to bring this perspective that says the world is not all about immediately now. This is good. If we look again at education, right? If you want to learn the trumpet, you cannot learn the trumpet now.
No.
Right?
There's no matrix down
years, right? That you can't plug in and learn it, right? And so because technology has primed us for now, technology has primed us to be really bad at learning things. We've got, Google gives us information at our fingertips, but it doesn't allow us to master skills because skills cannot be downloaded now. And so coming from this intergenerational perspective allows us to say that the world can be different from what you're used to. And doing that breaks this machine mentality. One other, slight digression, but it's hopefully relevant to the conversation. So looking at inconvenience, we're discussing how to be deliberately inconvenient. And so, like, one of the great things about Zoom is, previously you give a lecture and you give it to like 100 students, and 100 students would listen to it, and that's fine. But now you can put a YouTube video online, and like 1,000 people can watch it, and I've got this much bigger reach. And it doesn't have, if I'm giving a lecture, they have to be in that place at that time for that duration of when I'm doing it. And we go, well, YouTube's so convenient because I just put the lecture online, and then anyone in the world at any time they want can watch it at their own convenience. This is convenient. You said, but what do we lose when I'm in a lecture? If someone has a question, they can go, hang on. And, if someone wants to come up and ask me a question afterwards, there's always, 10 minutes after the lecture, you've got this gaggle of students who goes, but what about this? How about that? Right? You've got this human interaction, which on a YouTube thing you can't get. And on a Zoom lecture where you just zoom to 1,000 unknown IP addresses, you can't get. So I said, well, here's what you can do. If you want to reach 1,000 people, but you want to maintain this humane aspect, then you better make sure that it's inconvenient, right? Don't put it online afterwards. Say, if you want to listen to this lecture, come at this time, and we will then have an interpersonal interaction. And I can't do Q&A with 1,000 people. I can only do it with 100, or maybe I can only do it with 20, which means I'm going to have to give the lecture 10 times. But if I need to give the lecture 10 times, twice a day for a week, that is inconvenient, but by gosh, it's humane. And so you can still use the technology, but not accept that you have to go with the technological values.
Yeah. Yeah, my father was born in 1928, and I'm of the generation that, same as you, that when we were youngsters we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mobile phones, and your parents was the first person to answer your questions. Papa, what does this mean? And then, he was our internet. My mum and dad were our internet of the time. And it's fascinating that the amount of knowledge that they learned to have on the ends of their fingertips that they could recall faster than Google could. And any information that we couldn't get, initially my father would say, pass me the dictionary, or pass me this, and he would go through it, and then eventually it was us that he said dictionary, and then we would be on the ground in front of Papa, and then we would sort of go look up that word, and then inevitably we would see a whole bunch of other words that next to it, and like, Papa, I bet you don't know what the word exigent means. Of course I know what the word exigent means, like, and it's these sorts of things that sort of like form these memories of my dad, and then of course he passes away, and these are the things that I've got left over from him, and yeah, and it's just rather concerning that I see the youngsters nowadays, and I know time and tide has moved on, and I'm sure they've got similar sorts of experiences, but I don't see 11-year-olds throwing themselves off buildings. I don't see that. I mean, I do see that now. And it's really concerning. It's really concerning. So like, yeah, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you on, to come and talk about this very issue. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do we navigate ourselves through this quagmire that we've created, this technological quagmire, this forest that even myself, as I'm writing internet protocols. These youngsters are talking about technology like applications that I don't even want to know. I feel like an old guy, and yet I can write those applications. I understand the psychology behind it. I understand why they exist. I understand on a protocol level how that stuff works. And yeah, there's this whole sort of communities that have arisen that are not connected to the papas and mamas. And as a result, it's like, predators can walk into those environments.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so maybe to give two responses to that. One is, one thing that we do at home with our kids, which it's hard and it's getting harder, but I stick to it as far as I possibly can, is we have a house rule that says no phones at the table. Right? So when we sit down for breakfast, dinner, lunch, whatever, once we sit down at the table,
Yeah.
there are no phones. And if your phone rings, you hang it up.
Yeah.
And if it beeps and it buzzes, you ignore it.
Yeah.
And so the argument as we give it is to say, we don't have that much time to sit around together, and there is nothing on the phone which is going to be more important than actually having a conversation with the people physically face to face with you.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have on date nights as well. I want to go out with my wife, but you'll see people at the next table, beautiful girl.
Oh God.
And the guy is
This gets up. This is a bee in my bonnet,
you're like,
man.
there is nothing, there can be nothing on your phone which is worth looking at more than the woman in front of you. I promise you. But I only occasionally actually go up and tap the guy on the shoulder and say that, and my wife hates me for it. But we hold this rule. We say, okay, no phones at the table. And occasionally,
Good for you. Good for you for doing that. Really. How fortunate is that guy to have that? Like, I've been known to sit at a table with mates, and they know that this really irritates me. Like, everyone pulls the phone out, and it's like, okay, endure, and then at some point in the evening, I'm like, right, stack the phones, everybody, stack those fucking phones, put them over there, put something on top of it.
Right.
I'm here to be with you, not to be with this bloody phone. And of course they sort of sneak it away, but like, I'm
suddenly need to go to the loo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But I mean, and so and the nice thing is, so the thing that I'm dreading, and one of the reasons why we're now really having to, I'm really working to impose it hard, is because, my eldest is 11, and he's reaching the point where, if we don't set the example now by saying this is the way the world is, there are no phones at the table, right? It's going to be very, very soon where he wants to have a phone and wants to have a phone at the table.
Yeah.
And if suddenly then I introduce the rule that says, oh no, I'm going to put my phone down now and you have to do too, well, hang on, what's that? Yeah. But if he can say, okay, yeah, Feb cop, for the last 11 years you've lived this through. Yeah. And the really nice thing is sometimes, like, my phone will buzz and just reflex, right? I'll go and I'll check it. And my 6-year-old son will say, Daddy, no phones at the table. And I have to congratulate him. I'm like, good point, Benny, well made. Down it goes.
Yeah. So you set the example of not fighting,
right,
not arguing and making excuses. Like,
Yep, fair cop.
Put it down.
You are correct. Yeah. And next time when you're old and you have a phone, I say no phones at the table. Hopefully he will follow my example. But yeah, and I think another thing that where, again, wanting to sort of inject some notes of hope into this conversation, because I think it's not
doom and gloom.
I think it's not doom and gloom, and the future has the potential to be absolutely terrible, but I think that we don't need to walk into it thinking that it's going to be, and I think there are things we can do. And my job, what I do at Hong Kong U is, a lot of academics, like physicists and engineers and things, right? They have been taught that technology is neutral. They've been raised in this, and most engineering professors do not read philosophy. I mean, they have enough to do running departments and things, right? They don't read philosophy. They don't look at these wider ideas. And when their engineering professor said technology is neutral, they accepted it, and so now they tell their students that technology is neutral. The next generation is going to pass on the same thing. Oh. And so one of my tasks, and I kid you not, I've had engineering professors tell me, that there is nothing that an engineer does where they need to think of wider moral problems apart from what any person would face. An engineering professor or an arts professor, there are basic ethical problems we have to worry about, but there's nothing specific to engineering.
Yeah. So
I said, okay, is there anything that an artist could do whereby following their work, you'd be able to press one button and wipe out a city? And the professor thought for a second and said, okay, apart from nuclear weapons, there is nothing that special pleading, here we go. Right. So they are ingrained with this idea that they don't have to think about this question. They're just making the phones. It's not up to them how you use it. Yeah. And so part of my job is just to walk with academics and say, there is a whole area of really interesting research. Right, once you open the gates to this, there's interesting questions. There's whole new things that you can research, things that you can look into, ways you can think, problems you can approach. There's all sorts of new and interesting things that you can get funding for, right? There's new stuff that you can do if only you realise that this vast swathe of questions exists. But most of them don't realise that the questions even exist. And so part of my job is just walking alongside academics and saying, don't think that you need to bracket out that is aught, subjective, value-laden religious questions just because you're an engineer, right? They come in and it is possible to connect them to your research, and it is necessary to connect them to your research, and it's good to connect them to your research.
I like that, but then at some point I do get worried about the social justice angle that sort of comes into that. So how far is too far? I think this kind of question is really important.
So what's your concern for the social justice angle?
Okay, so, well, we know that if I start to resonate with, like, for example, a particular group of people, I say, okay, this group of people is the Aryans no good. We've seen that experiment before. It happened before. And then what's the opposite end of that spectrum? If I start to say, yeah, okay, social justice for everybody, and now I start to create a group of people, and I need to feel significant in this group of people, and I start virtue signaling to this group of people about how important I am, and maybe money starts to flow in these circles, and I need to justify it, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's this sort of like this entity, this machine that becomes all-consuming, that eats itself, that's always like trying to find issues and problems about itself, and where can I one-up you because you weren't the right level of social justice. Times and tides have moved on. Now we've got a new level of social justice, and if you're of a certain skin color, well, I mean, it doesn't matter because it's you just by even ignoring the fact that you're, or just by saying that you're, for example, not racist, well, that means you're a racist. You see what I mean? So it reaches these sorts of like completely logically incorrect, crazy.
Yeah. That's easy.
Oh yeah.
Don't do that.
No, don't do that.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's
Sorry.
easy. But but
No. Okay. So I get where you're going, and so I think
like lines need to be drawn.
I'm going to be careful here. I would not draw lines.
Ooh.
Oh. Partly because lines are really good to fight over.
That's true.
Right? If so you say, okay, as soon as you like, okay, it's one thing to say you should eat less meat, and then the next person says, yeah, but I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
You meat eater, you're destroying the planet. The next person says, well, I'm vegan. You vegetarian. All right. And so the vegetarian sits in the middle and says, right, well, clearly the vegan has gone too far, right?
Yeah.
So you need to go some way towards saving the planet, but don't go nuts over it. Where do you draw the line? And obviously, and it's very simple, right? The line for not enough is just next to me here, and the line for too much is just next to me here, right? Well, right? And no one, when they're drawing the lines, is going to draw any other lines than a little bit this way one side and a little bit this way the other, and oh, look, I'm in the right place. Right? This is what happens when we draw lines. Now, on the other hand, I mean, if so one of the
That was a very human thing to do. Turning your watch upside down.
Sorry, this was
no. We've reached about 3 hours, so
Have
we
we?
sort of
Yeah,
like we
yeah.
can start to run down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, this is just me playing with it. And maybe subconsciously realizing that it's not important anymore because we're done. And it just
Yeah.
now we have the machine logic that says good conversations need to last 3 hours.
Exactly.
And we have the humane logic that says, look at me like I care. So to answer your question, because you've asked, I've started, so I'll finish. Right. So I think rather than drawing lines, I wouldn't draw lines.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, I mean, in the notion of, again, recognizing the humanity of these things, it's really easy if we can categorize things, if we can put things in boxes that says this is enough and this is too much.
Yeah.
It's one thing for this person to say, you know, they love the environment and they're going to this conference to speak about it, but they took a plane to get there. That's clearly wrong, right? And yes, maybe they planted trees, but they planted the wrong kind of trees, or they planted it with a charity that hasn't been certified. You know, whatever you want, you can pick why someone's doing something wrong. And I think one thing that's important and lacking in a lot of the discourse is a level of compassion that says, you know, there are people who do not agree with me. I mean, there are people who are genuinely fighting for the opposite of what I'm fighting for. There are people who are fighting for the same thing, but maybe not as hard as me. And there are people who are fighting for the same thing, and they're just complete nutters that have lost all connection with sanity, that are way over here, right? And to have compassion for them, to say, I wouldn't do it that way, but you're not me. And to be less, you know, to be less destructive in what we're trying to do. You know, I look at, you know, the way people engage with, I mean, parenting, for example.
Belligerent too.
We've touched on parenting at various points in this. You know, there are different ways that people in Hong Kong parent.
Oh, very much. Very much.
And the one of the things I learned very early on in parenting is whatever you do, you know, elimination communication, right? If you potty train your child at this age, well, that's child abuse because whatever, right? If you haven't trained them by this age, that's child abuse, right? Whatever you do, there's someone who's going to tell you that's child abuse. And it's wonderful just to have people who parent differently from you to say, you know, parenting is tough, and we're working at it, and you're working at it, and I wish you all the best, and if there's anything I can do to help you to raise slightly well-adjusted kids, I'm here for you. Right? I mean, that does not require a line to be drawn.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some rather regressive people that can walk into these sorts of into these environments, and like, yeah, when you're dealing with reasonable people, you can have that sort of discussion, but sometimes those rather disagreeable, belligerent people, well, I don't know how to handle them, but that's probably for another conversation.
That might be another conversation.
Yeah. Mike, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Yeah. We'll have you on 10, 20 episodes later. Think about something else and bring it up. Brilliant. Let's kill this. Whoa. Don't go anywhere just yet. Mike sent a few follow-up messages after the Indaba. And I thought I'd just play them for you, and here we go. So Mike's voice is a little bit muffled from the mask, so here you go.
Hi Stuart, it's Mike. Thanks for this evening. It was fun. I enjoyed the opportunity to sit and just bounce around ideas for a couple of hours. Yeah, thanks. Now, here's for the bad news. The bad news is, I have all of your questions still going around my head, and it would be really nice to say, okay, well that was 3 hours of fun and now I'm just going to stop thinking about those questions, but it doesn't work like that. And so now at like random intervals I'm just going to send you messages going, oh, I just had a thought. So I know it's no use to you, but here we go, I'm going to throw it in anyway, because here we go. So you asked I'm really sorry, you asked like where do you draw the line, and I've just realised as I was on the MTR, I've just realised another reason why I'm really not comfortable with drawing a line. Now, I know I gave a couple in the talk, but I've just realised another one. Right? Lines are simple, and they are neat, and they are efficient, And lines hold universally, like they're nicely uniform. It's like, here is the line and no one gets to cross it. Now, for all of those reasons, lines are deeply inhumane, right? They're a technological construct. So here's the situation we actually face, right? Because people are messy, right? People have hopes and dreams and visions and desires and context and nuance, right? There are some people where if they cross the line, it's like that is absolutely, totally inappropriate. You should be nowhere near that line. And there are other people where it's like, hey, I'm glad you got this far. Well done, good effort, given where you started. Hat off. So, yeah. So the reason why I wouldn't attempt to draw a line, in addition to all the reasons I gave in the discussion earlier, is because drawing lines is a technological mindset and inhumane. Hope you have a good evening. And the flip side, of course, the refusal to draw a line, the insistence on taking each situation on a case-by-case basis, is that it is insanely inefficient, right? If you sit down with someone and say, well, okay, you're doing this, but why are you doing that? In what context are you doing that? To whom are you doing that? What are you trying to achieve in your situation with this person right now as it stands? And treating each situation as an individual case, to understand it, to actually get to grips with a human being involved, that's inconvenient. To say I'm not going to sit and judge this as being a good or a bad thing to do, or appropriate or inappropriate, until I've actually sat down and done the footwork and got all relevant information and understood the situation, that's really inefficient. That's really slow. That's wonderfully humane. And yeah, doesn't work with drawing lines. Doesn't work with a technological mindset. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling. But hey, I'm on a walk home, so I figured I might as well share what my brain was thinking. I'm sorry, I'm going to share this one, and then I'm going to be home, and then I'm going to let you get on with your evening and not be trolled by me sending more messages. But okay, so you raised the point about with the left-handed scissors, where you said, okay, so now the left-handed people have been pressed into conformity with what's convenient for most people, and I said, but ultimately the machine presses you into conformity with something which is not convenient for anyone. And so the example I used, we then went down a rabbit trail with education, but here's an example of cars in America. So with people get cars, and as you look at the building of suburbia, you end up with this technological mindset where you say, okay, well, cars are good because then you can get around faster. But then you realise that in order to have the space for the roads and in order to have the space for the parking and so on and so forth, everything gets more spaced out, and you get shops that are miles away from anywhere. So now if you don't have a car, you cannot survive or go shopping, and now everyone lives 2 hours commute from work. So you've hit this sort of Nash equilibrium, whereby if everyone got rid of cars and you just started from scratch and everyone just lived closer together and locally, and you didn't have these super highways running straight through the middle of your neighbourhood so that you could get around without cars, it would be better for no one to have cars. But now, in the name of ease and simplicity and doing things efficiently and quickly, people spend 2 hours a day in a traffic jam. And that's better for no one, but you've got this suboptimal Nash equilibrium that technology kind of ushered you into and you can't get out of. Yeah, like I say, I'm going to leave you to your evening now. I'm going to try and stop sending messages. See if I succeed.
And that's it. Mike, thanks so much for the conversation. Really appreciate it. Hope everybody else enjoyed it. Cheerio, ladies and gentlemen.